Hello everyone and welcome to a bit of a special Q&A video that's quite unique for the channel, which I'll explain in a second. I just wanted to do this introduction to explain why I'm making this video, who it's aimed at, and if you just want to skip this and get straight to hearing my answers to all these questions, as always the description has chapters. You can just jump around all the different questions. It's quite a long video, so I'm not expecting everyone to sit for 3 hours watching it. You can come back and check out different questions. That's fine if you want to just go and do that. But I really wanted to do this introduction to show this is a bit of a unique video for the channel and explain the structure of it as well to the people who asked the questions as well. So for quite a few years, many years, I have a friend who teaches English, like English Lit in the US, and she informed me a little while back that she was showing her students one of my videos, specifically about the Council of Elrond. And I thought it was great. It's quite humbling. I've never had any of my videos shown in some sort of educational setting that I know of, so I was really happy to hear that. And I thought, well, if there's any questions they want to know about it, let me know. And that's exactly what's happened. So the students have read The Fellowship of the Ring, and these questions are really mostly specific to The Fellowship of the Ring. There are some about the wider Legendarium, there are some personal ones as well, but I said I'd answer any questions they had. And this video is really aimed at you, the students, if any of you are watching. I've made it public for everyone to enjoy in the channel, but I really went into this specifically wanting to answer the questions for people who I'm assuming haven't read beyond The Fellowship of the Ring. So there are some questions where I could have gone into more detail, I could have spoiled some things. You'll hear me stopping a few times to try and not do that. I really want you to go on to The Two Towers and Return of the King if you really liked Fellowship, and if you have questions after that, I'm sure I'll get them later. But this is really a Q&A for you guys, and assuming that you haven't read beyond Fellowship of the Ring, but I'm really hoping that you do. But I hope everyone else enjoys it, and I just wanted to explain that a little bit in case some people were thinking, why didn't he mention this or that? I'm trying to avoid spoilers. It's very rare for me to talk to people about Tolkien who haven't read all of Lord of the Rings, or they're a little bit through it. It's quite interesting trying to answer questions that way. So for the structure of this video, you'll see that all your questions are there. There's a few that are reworded a little bit, but the essence of the question is still there. And I decided to go with a real introductory kind of format. So you'll see with certain questions while I'm answering them, at the bottom left of the screen, some little information box will come up sometimes with place names or character names or concepts. Again, if you already know that, I'm not being condescending or anything. I'm just thinking if you've maybe read through Fellowship once or something like that, some things may have been forgotten, and in answering the questions I really do have to sometimes go a bit wider than Fellowship to give context or whatever, and I've put in little info boxes there to just refresh or give some extra information, because as you probably know from reading Fellowship, Tolkien's pretty huge with the amount of characters and places and the history, and I felt, well, it'd be good to give some little background information. And then there's a few little bits that will come up at this side of the screen saying like note. That's really specific sources and references when I use some quotes on screen. I've done that in a few questions. I felt I really should quote Tolkien directly to answer your question, and you'll see all them at the end of the video. So there's a section at the end where I show the sources and where you can go and explore them yourselves. I just wanted to just explain that format. I know it's a 3 hour long video. I'm not expecting you all to sit and watch it for 3 hours, but as I said at the beginning, I've broken it all up into chapters. You can come back to the video or just skip questions that you're not really interested in. But this video was really made for you. I hope everyone else does enjoy it, but I'm really hoping that you do. And thanks for all the questions. I thought there were some really great ones there. And I hope that my answers are satisfactory, and I'd really hope that maybe even some of you, through hearing these answers, are eager to continue reading Tolkien, which I really hope you all do. So that's all I've got to say. I hope you enjoy the video, and thanks again for sending me all your questions. A good opening question is, how does the Council chapter foreshadow the conflicts and challenges the characters face on their journey? I want to be clear here that even though everyone can listen to these answers, and I'm hoping people enjoy them, they are directed at these students, and I'm aware that maybe all of you, or at least most of you, haven't read beyond the Fellowship of the Ring, and I hope you do. So there's answers here I could give that I won't, because I don't want to spoil the story for you. I really don't want to do that. I'm hoping you enjoy the story and read it yourselves. So there's some points here I would make, that some things are foreshadowed that would pop up in Two Towers and Return of the King that I can't really talk about. But there are some that are related to Fellowship directly. I think the most obvious one is Boromir, who at the council is quite vocal about Gondor, his homeland, the suffering they're going through, wanting to potentially use the ring, though at this stage he's saying, oh, someone great could do it. We could use this ring against Sauron. Even when it's explained to him why that shouldn't happen, why it can't happen, he kind of accepts the words of the wise, but you can tell that if that idea was there, it's not just disappearing. He does think that the journey Frodo would take to Mordor is pretty much suicidal. And as we see through the journey, there's all these little moments, little things that Boromir says, the looks that he's giving, that this is really occupying his mind, until we do reach the moment where it's basically unbearable for him, and he starts to say some really strange things, like asking to borrow the ring, and it's uncontrollable by that stage, and he attempts to seize it. That's not obvious, but if you had to guess a character that would go on the journey from all the way back in the Council of Elrond who would do that, you would say Boromir. And it's from a place of, you should pity him. It's from a place of originally fearing for his people, all the suffering that Gondor is going through. You should think of it that way, and that the ring, it's like eating away at him the whole time until it turns into madness. That's a clear moment of foreshadowing, I think. Another's a little moment here with Legolas telling the story of Gollum in Mirkwood escaping, and it mentions that it's through overkindness. They were letting Gollum climb trees and they weren't keeping him in chains or anything. And Glóin, who's the father of Gimli, who goes on the journey, talks about, oh, you weren't so kind to me. He's talking about being held by Legolas's father, Thranduil, in The Hobbit. And Gandalf basically says, no, like, if we get into everything with the elves and dwarves here, we might as well just abandon the council. That's a nice little moment where there's obvious hostility and history between these peoples. It's not always been like that, and not all figures have held hostility, especially when it comes to Moria, Khazad-dûm. But it's a nice moment where Legolas is involved in that, Gimli's father's involved in that little moment, and they both become, Gimli and Legolas become members of the Fellowship, and over the course of the full story, but we see it in the Fellowship of the Ring. They become extremely close friends. By the time they reach Lothlorien, they're away exploring it together. Gimli, if he just went to Lothlorien at the time of the council, wouldn't have been doing that. But they're close now, and sharing a boat and everything like that. It's getting told to us that they're pretty much become inseparable, and it's like healing hurts and really taking this fellowship thing seriously. A lot of friendships are made, but that's kind of hinted at all the way from the council, where we're getting told that there's animosity and a history with these peoples, and if you've not read other Tolkien texts, you might be like, oh, what's this all about? But we then see an elf and a dwarf become like extremely close friends. There's someone like Aragorn, where I can't go into too much detail, but because of things later in the story, but we've known him up until the council as Strider. He's a ranger. We're hearing terms like he's a Dunedain, he's of the Dunedain. Again, if you're first reading this, you might not know what all that means. At the council, it's like fully revealed that he's Aragorn, and he's Isildur's heir. He should be like a king, and assuming that great leadership position, and he's now going to leave Rivendell as Aragorn, and he's not Strider, he's Aragorn. And as we go through the Fellowship tale, he's thrust into that leadership position far earlier than anticipated, which would potentially aid him in a future role as a king. Gandalf obviously dies in Moria, and Aragorn has to take over, and it's almost like this is the final step before assuming a kingly role. He's now in charge of the most important event in the Third Age, basically, this attempt to defeat Sauron through this mission of secrecy. And that's how I'd relate Aragorn to the council here. It's hearing about the potential of what he can be, the sword reforged, I'm going to be the king, and this is like a final step in that process, which was an unexpected one through Gandalf's fall. Another one is right at the end of the council, when Frodo's said, I'll take the ring. Elrond says, "Oh, this seems right. That you're the one to take it. That if you're accepting this, it seems right." And Sam kind of speaks up. He's been kind of hidden the whole time, and says, "Oh, he's not going to go alone. Is he? You're not expecting to send him alone?" And Elrond kind of jests a bit with him, saying, like, he's invited to a secret meeting, and you're not, but you're inseparable. Like, you at least will go with him. And that's like the perfect foreshadowing for the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, where Frodo, after thinking that he's a burden on others, that the ring is going to tempt them, that's what happened with Boromir will happen to others, and he doesn't want that. Especially the likes of Aragorn, he's friends with other hobbits. He wants to go on his own because it is his burden, and he was the only one that accepted that it was his burden. The rest never swore oaths, and there's no point going to Minas Tirith and Gondor. We have to go to Mordor, and I can't bear to be responsible for what happens to the others. I'll separate myself from them. But he can't, because Sam is inseparable from him, and he also calls out to Frodo about, going alone, and he'll go with him. And that's obvious all the way back from the Council of Elrond, where Elrond himself's wise to it, where Sam has to go with him, and Sam plays an important role, and there's absolutely no way that Frodo would have been able to go far on his own after that. It's brave of him to think about his friends, very selfless there, but Sam has to go with him, and it's right that he does, and we've known that from the Council of Elrond. And there's a bit of a cheat here. It's not really the council, but in the right next chapter, when they're deciding who's to go on this journey, when they've decided the number is 9, and that eventually the last 2 positions that were going to be filled by people of Elrond's household, Gandalf pushes that friendship should win out here and that Merry and Pippin should be allowed to go. That's not say foreshadowing. It's the idea of friendship being more important here than swords is definitely the case, but Merry and Pippin themselves, again, I can't spoil things from later in the story, but it is important that they go, and someone like Gandalf, even beyond Elrond's foresight, could see that there's wisdom in sending friends instead of warriors here, and it's also letting us know that this will help Frodo, even when they are separated at the end of the Fellowship. Someone like Sam is a companion to Frodo through such a pure friendship, and Merry and Pippin aren't a burden on the journey. They can see themselves as that. They're not as great as other figures, but they will play important roles, and basically everything about this council and everyone that's chosen seem to be the right people that are chosen for various reasons. Even Boromir's actions bring about a change and lead to different paths for different figures, almost like it had to happen. Boromir's fall and descent into madness tells everyone about the real danger of the ring and the seriousness of this situation. It leads all these figures to go on various paths that, again, not spoiling anything, become very important later on in the story. These are 2 questions that I think are really, really linked, so I'm going to answer both of them at once. So if I were at the council, would I have proposed a different solution? What would it be? And this ties in with what would I have done if I were at the council. It's a bit like, I'm not comparing the Council of Elrond to Nazi Germany here, but if some people have this question they ask about if you were in Nazi Germany, the rise of Hitler and everything, what would you have done? And a lot of people are like, I would have resisted and fought, and they're basically thinking that for millions who accepted it, they would be one of the few that would have never have agreed to it, and would have fought against such evil and everything. And that's nonsense. Most would have just been like everyone else and went along with it. And again, I'm not comparing the Council of Elrond to that, but I'm just saying, if I place myself in the story, it's easy in hindsight for me to say I would have completely followed the wisdom of Elrond and Gandalf and accepted everything they said, instead of me thinking I'd be someone like Boromir. Why wouldn't I be someone like Boromir? I'm of the race of men as well, and let's say I was there with him, I'd probably side with him. Someone who was fighting in these wars and seeing his people die and his kingdom kind of fall, or it's going to fall. Hearing these others say, no, we're not going to use this great power against Sauron, we're going to go on what seems like a suicide mission and try and destroy it. I'd be as incredulous as someone like Boromir, surely. Right? Why would I assume I've got the wisdom of Gandalf or someone? I'd be like, what? We should use this. Hopefully I wouldn't be like that, but let's be realistic. But ideally, I would hope that with figures known as the Wise actually being there, Gandalf and Elrond, that they're looking out for your best interests as well. They're thinking of the real solutions to the problem, and they understand greater things than I can understand, plans that are in motion and the signs that this is the right thing to do. And you'd hope that you'd be like, yeah, we have to do what they say, that makes sense, that's why they're the Wise, instead of me siding with Boromir or someone, which again I don't know what it'd be like in that situation. And obviously following Gandalf and Elrond would be the right thing to do. So in saying that, I wouldn't have a different resolution, because they pretty much cover all of them, I think, and there's reasons they can't go along with them. I have a video about this where I go through all the possible solutions and why they wouldn't work. I'll link that in the description as well. But you can't hide the ring, because Sauron could still find it, and Sauron could still defeat Middle-earth without it. You can't take the ring west, because the Valar won't take it. It's Middle-earth's problem. You could use it against Sauron, but very few figures would potentially become a new Lord of the Rings. It would take time, and he could just come forth and maybe get it back. It's very risky, and you're replacing Sauron with a new tyrant. That's not a good solution. You can't defeat Sauron through your military, it's too great. You can't just take it to like Minas Tirith and build all your forces and wait. Sauron could still come and defeat you. You're just delaying the inevitable. Everything just leads to, we have to destroy it. That's the only way. And I'll cover this in a question that's coming up about why I think that's the only way to defeat him, because it really is. You're not going to be able to get rid of Sauron any other way. And you're basically cutting through everything in the council and saying, no, the only way we can really defeat this tyrant is to, destroy the ring. I can't think of any other suggestion that would work. It doesn't make any sense. It has to be that. It's the only way to do it. Some people may say things like the journey itself could have been different. I know that's after the council and they start talking about where they're going to go, but even Gandalf covers that. Again, if you're on this journey with Gandalf and he's taking a certain path, surely you would just trust in Gandalf. Boromir's suggestion for the journey won't make sense, because the path he took is different now than when he arrived in Rivendell. Going so far off course could take like a year, and you're going through lands that are quite barren, but it's full of spies of Sauron and even Saruman. Like birds and other beasts would report that you were there. You want to take this path where you're going through places where you could rest safely, and we see that with when they go up Carathras, which they have to end up descending again because of the mountain itself basically setting its will against them. The path in the end of that would have still been the same. So passing over Carathras would take you to the Dimril Dale and to Mirrormere outside the east gate of Moria. That would have been where they come down over the mountain. But instead they have to go under through the west gate of Moria, through Moria, out the east gate. It's the same result, but things obviously happen during that journey. But then out the east gate you come to Lothlorien, which is clearly where Gandalf was going to go. But Gandalf is a being unlike us. I don't think he planned the full journey out. I think he'd planned up to Lothlorien, and events as they transpired would have Gandalf work out where they were going to go. That's how Gandalf would work. He's not going to plan the entire journey out. We'll adapt as we go. And the Fellowship still led to Lothlorien, and the decisions are then having to be made by Aragorn. They're almost taken away from him through the breaking of the Fellowship, but even just planning a different route and everything, it doesn't make sense. You would surely just bow to the wisdom of Gandalf, and the council decides destroying it is the correct course. The people they choose are apparently the right people they choose, and I would have proposed no other solutions because I don't think any other solutions would exist. Why do you think destroying the ring is the only way to defeat Sauron? Well, it's not. There is another way that just leads to a new Sauron. So if a being of sufficient stature bent the ring to his or her own will, fully becoming the Lord of the Rings, Sauron would be defeated. It'd be the same as the ring being thrown in the fire to destroy it. That's because that power that is in rapport with Sauron that he put into it would no longer belong to him necessarily. It would now belong to another independent being. And that would mean that all that Sauron had put into that ring was no longer his. He would diminish as a spirit. It's the exact same thing as destroying it. And he would be so diminished that he wouldn't even be able to challenge to get it back. It's not his anymore. But you should realise that from saying that, that's not a really good way to defeat him, because you're just replacing him. The ring is evil in its intent and its creation. And even though others can use it, you should ignore adaptations that say only Sauron can use it, or it has no other master and all this stuff. It's not true. Others could do this. Everyone can use the ring, but not everyone can master it. And if you did master it, you've defeated Sauron, but you're pretty much the new Sauron. So realistically, it's the only way to defeat him, destroying it. You don't want to replace him. And that's because at this moment in Middle-earth's history, defeating Sauron through warfare not only doesn't actually fully defeat him, he would come back later. It's not possible. It's not possible at this stage. The third age is quite different from the second. You should remember from the Council of Elrond chapter, and even Shadow of the Past, the second chapter, book 1, that an alliance of elves and men got together in the second age, and it was a great army led by 2 kings, and they managed to get into Mordor, and eventually Sauron came forth and was defeated, and the 2 kings were killed too. But Sauron was defeated, and no, he still come back because the ring was claimed by Isildur and not destroyed. But that was some force that gathered there. That was the last alliance of elves and men. You're never going to get an alliance like that again. One of the greatest forces ever assembled. The Third Age is very different. Most of Sauron's great enemies are gone. The kingdoms aren't as great as they were. A lot of elves have left, and you can't gather a force that could do this with Sauron. Sauron's armies are unbelievable and vast, and he's still gathering more to him. He doesn't need the ring to actually win, but he's desperate for the ring because his fear is that someone will use it. And it means you're left with no other options. I've talked about this in the previous questions, but when you just say, we could hide it, we could throw it away, that's just delaying the inevitable, and Sauron can still win. He could still go to war with you and destroy all of you, which he doesn't want to do. He wants to rule, but he can go to war and conquer. You can't take it over the sea, because we're told that the Valar won't take it. It's Middle-earth's issue. That's why the Istari were sent. It's for Middle-earth to deal with. You can maybe have someone attempt to bend it to their will, but like I said, you're replacing Sauron. If you start going through all these options, you're being pushed into the direction of, let's have a final say in this matter, let's destroy the ring. That will defeat Sauron, and he can't trouble the world again. And of course it's the most difficult option, but the most difficult option can be the right one. The easy options could be completely wrong. They would be in this case. And that's pretty much it. It's to truly defeat Sauron at this stage, you have to destroy the ring. He could come back if you don't. He could find it if you don't. He could defeat you through his military if you don't. And this is it. Everything's led to this moment, and it's the way to defeat him. And the signs are pointing to it's the right thing to do. We can't kick the can down the road and someone else will deal with it later. A final end to the menace, as Gandalf says, you have to destroy the ring. I don't see any other way. Even if there was some battle and Sauron for some reason came out to the battle and you managed to slay him again, if the ring still existed, he'll come back. And even doing that original thing I just said there would be very, very difficult. Sauron won't come out until victory's assured, basically. Or if someone had claimed the ring and was challenging him for the authority of it, he'd probably come forth to take it from them. You're just left with, we have to destroy this. It's the only way to diminish Sauron at this time of Middle-earth, and no force can be assembled that's great enough to just overwhelm Sauron's empire of Mordor. It's far too vast. He's not even gathered all the orcs in Middle-earth yet. There's still some that are dwelling in other places like the Misty Mountains. They would eventually have went to Sauron as well. Wicked men from the south and the east. He's got armies to spare, so you have to do it this way, the hard way. Somewhat related to the last question, if destroying the ring wasn't an option, what would have been the next best thing? I think if destroying the ring is not an option, you're doomed to fail, to be honest. If that isn't an option, it's basically being said that you're not really going to be defeating Sauron. It has to be an option. But if you just go with it, there's two main suggestions here, and both of them aren't very good. The first is that you allow someone with sufficient power to attempt to bend the ring to their own will, which would be disastrous, but you're desperate, aren't you? So if you really, really want to just defeat Sauron by not destroying the ring, you'd hope that someone like Gandalf would be tempted to just start using it and challenge Sauron directly. Horrible suggestions I'll get into in later questions, but what else can you do if you're not able to destroy it? That's the kind of desperation you'd be feeling, and it might not work. Sauron's still really great, and even though Tolkien says that Gandalf could do this, it doesn't mean that he would. And the other option is another one of desperation, but if we're saying that there's absolutely no hope of destroying the ring, it's not an option, I think the only thing you could do is send the emissaries back west, the likes of Gandalf, to plead on behalf of Middle-earth to the powers in the west, the Valar. Again, we're talking about that wouldn't happen, but we're talking about this scenario. For some reason, we can't defeat Sauron by destroying the ring. If we go and meet him in battle, we're all just going to die because his armies are too great. All hope's lost. There's nothing Middle-earth can do. At that stage, you would be like, this is a War of Wrath type situation from the First Age, where Morgoth basically had victory in Middle-earth, and Erendil sailed west to plead on behalf of both his kindreds, because he was half-elven, the elves and the men, and the Valar accepted his prayer and went to war with Morgoth and overthrew him. It would be something like that. You'd basically be saying, all hope in Middle-earth's lost, Sauron has won, and we're all just going to get we'll all have to either bow to him and serve him, or die in battle against him. That's plead to the powers territory, and again, this is all hypothetical thing. The ring itself belongs to Middle-earth, but we're talking about it being the only way to defeat Sauron is destroying it. And if you can't do that, can you please help us in some way? And you think there'd be some sort of pity and mercy, the Valar maybe do something. But again, none of this is happening because it's all tied in with the idea of Middle-earth defeating Sauron and inheriting stewardship over it, and the Age of Men coming forward, and there's a plan in motion here. But yeah, that'd be the suggestion, and you'd hope that if someone like Gandalf was on your ship, that you would actually get over there and desperate last plea. But there are, not wanting to spoil the story for those who haven't gone beyond Fellowship of the Ring, there are signs that powers are in motion to help defeat Sauron, and certain things happen that really show that. So this scenario wouldn't happen. But that's what I would suggest in that situation. Those who could defeat Sauron, but for reasons they aren't, you'd have to just plead on behalf of Middle Earth for salvation, basically, if all hope is lost in actually being able to defeat Sauron. In my opinion, which character had the most character development in the whole of the Fellowship? I have to say Frodo. I think it's Frodo. I think Aragorn goes through some change with his introduction as Strider, kind of wandering Middle Earth and being in the shadows a little bit, waiting for the right time to come forward. That time's now. Fate's led all these people to this place at this time. The sword will be reforged. He'll leave Rivendell as Aragorn and on his path to becoming king. And through Gandalf's fall, he's put into the leadership position for the Fellowship and has to make really tough choices and doubts himself. And that doubt gets carried forward into the Two Towers, where he wants to kind of redeem himself through indecision in the Fellowship. All of that. I think there's a lot of people say he goes through no development. I don't understand that at all. But I'd say Frodo, because you have to think all the way back to the first and second chapters, where Frodo inherits this ring from Bilbo. And just remember the way Frodo talks to Gandalf when he's getting told all this really frightening information about Mordor, a place he has heard of, but Sauron and the threat of this ring. And Frodo is very, very naive back then. He's considered the best the Shire has to offer, and there's no doubt of that. He's a great hobbit. He does have wisdom, eagerness for adventure and knowledge. He's a learned hobbit. He's a perfect for this quest, but he's still naive to a lot of the outside world, and he completely doesn't understand certain things Gandalf's saying, like where we could just not use it and this kind of thing, and it's like, that's not going to work. Why would Sauron want to enslave us? He's completely oblivious to the sheer malice of someone like Sauron, who, if he discovered there was this large kind of realm of free folk enjoying themselves and being oblivious to his existence, he would want to end that. Better to have them enslaved, bent to his own will. That's what he wants. Sheer malice, especially if he discovered that the ring had been there for quite a few years, and this is kind of ended at through the rest of the story, where it's not like he would kill Frodo for having the ring. He'd torment him. It's like evil. You thought you could take this ring and use this ring, and Sauron would get an enjoyment out of tormenting figures like that, instead of just killing them, where they pass beyond his reach. And Frodo's really naive to all of that. What good would hobbit slaves be in that? He goes, they don't even have to be good slaves, they just have to be slaves. And the threat of the ring, we see as Frodo goes on his journey, passes into the house of Tom Bombadil, and grows a bit in his wisdom. We have this moment in the barrow where he wakes up and he's been separated from his friends, but they have a sword across them, and there's some ritual going on with the wights that dwell in the barrow, and Frodo contemplates running away, just putting the ring on and escaping. This uncontrollable dread and fear that would lead us to do things that we wouldn't want to do. Frodo goes through the same conflict in his mind, and I'm not saying the Frodo of chapter 2 would do it, but he has to go through these moments of conflict and realizing what's important and what's at stake and who he is. And that happens where he could have put the ring on and just escaped, but he says no, that's like craven, he wouldn't do that. And he realizes he could call Tom Bombadil, but it was a real moment of conflict there. He's convincing himself, I could escape. People like Gandalf would realize there's nothing else that could be done, and he's convincing himself that it would be okay to do it, but he would be subjecting his friends to death and torment. And he says no, and he doesn't do that. And we go forward to Weathertop, where Frodo, in direct conflict with the most fearsome beings around, except for their master Sauron, are coming directly for him, and he strikes out with his sword and directly challenges them. Even if it's through fear, it doesn't matter. He stands up to them a bit. And would Frodo of chapter 1 and 2 do that? It's because I don't blame the rest of the hobbits for being absolutely petrified and these ring wraiths standing in front of them, and the fact that Frodo doesn't just fall over is remarkable. And he's growing as he goes through the story. And we even have that moment at the ford where he tries it again. He's been stabbed. He's lasted longer than some heroic men would have lasted, and he's still around. He's not faded yet. And even when the ringwraiths are all standing there across the water, he raises his sword and attempts to challenge them again. He's still fighting, and they kind of laugh at him and mock him because he's growing very weak now. And the Lord of the Nazgul destroys his sword, but he still tried. It's still a courageous moment, and this is through everything he's been going through for the story. You know, things change a bit for him there because he gets injured in this way, this everlasting wound, and I think he grows from these traumatic experiences, understanding a bit more about evil in the world and standing against it. And we go through to Lothlorien, and this Frodo that's standing in front of Galadriel is different from the Frodo of chapter 2. He's grown so much in that he's grown in stature and wisdom, knowledge. He's got a keener eyesight. I know he's got the one ring, but he's asking questions about it, and Galadriel is speaking to him with such respect. She compliments that his eyesight's grown keener because he notices that she has one of the rings of power, because that can't be hidden. Like, she would be hiding that from everyone else, but that can't be hidden from Frodo. And yes, he does offer the ring, which is what she desired, and she didn't even have to ask for it, and she mentions that as well. And when it's rejected and it's Frodo that has to continue carrying the ring, he does. And we go all the way through to his confrontation with Boromir, where he very wisely saying that it'd be a disaster to take it anywhere near Minas Tirith. That's the wrong direction as well. We're not going to defeat Sauron that way, and look what it's doing to Boromir. And from that conflict as well, he then understands that it's a very dangerous thing to be around other people with this object. People have their own goals with it, and it can turn people to madness. And he decides, well, I accepted this burden, I'll go on the journey myself. He's doing that out of love for the Fellowship and actually really caring about what happens to them, and taking on that full burden himself that he doesn't have to because Sam goes with him. But this is the Frodo we're left with at the end of Fellowship, and I think you'd be hard pressed to suggest to anyone else in the Fellowship that goes through such a development. And it continues through Two Towers: Return of the King. I'll talk about this in the next following question about there's two questions about the movies and why it was such a shame the way Frodo was treated, because I think he goes through the most development, and it's a amazing development through real decisions that were made in real conflict, and I think he would stand alone as the character with the greatest development and the most development through that volume. How is it so easy for you to understand and comprehend the chapter in the Fellowship of the Ring called the Council of Elrond? One thing I'll say here though is I'm not new to the Lord of the Rings. I did not, as you say, comprehend and understand this chapter the first read, or the second read, or probably the third read. There's so much information there. It's such a massive chapter. There's so many references and characters introduced, and a lot of information to take in. And it's almost like the point of the story where everything changes going forward. It's so pivotal. I've explained all that in the Council of Elrond video. But for me, understanding and comprehending it is just through a lot of reading of that chapter, the Fellowship of the Ring, the Lord of the Rings, and other Tolkien books as well. It's almost like you read so much of it so often that when certain things start getting mentioned in the council, you can remember what it's talking about from other sources. You just get this familiarity and understanding of it. And, you know, I could walk you through the Council of Elrond, like, in order probably. I've read it so often. As I said in that video, it must be at least 100 times by now or something. And if I didn't comprehend it and understand it in that number of reads, you know, what am I doing? What am I even reading? So if you've read it once or twice for studies or something like that, and you're confused, or someone's asking you a question about it and you don't remember or something, that's understandable. It's, if you get through the whole of Lord of the Rings, I guarantee there'll be plenty from early chapters in Fellowship of the Ring or Two Towers or something where you've forgotten characters or things that happened and you have to be reminded. But if you are interested in it, when you finish, you'll want to read it again. And the people who have a real familiarity and understanding of it read it often and read it a lot and really enjoy it. So that's why you end up taking it in and you want to learn a bit more about it. It's just through reading and, you know, looking at Tolkien beyond Lord of the Rings as well, reading things in his letters that reference the Council of Elrond and the Lord of the Rings as a whole, you just start piecing it all together and thinking of, a bit like you guys have here with questions, you'll think of questions yourself reading it, and you'll want to get the answers for it, and you'll go and look, and it just all comes together. So it's, you have to enjoy it and read it again and again, but you'll want to. It won't feel like study or homework or a chore. If you're really interested in this, you'll want to find answers and you'll want to think of new questions and you'll want to discuss it with people, and that just increases your understanding, because Lord of the Rings is huge in scale, and in Middle Earth and the Legendarium, as we call it, is even larger. There's so much to read, and if you've enjoyed Fellowship of the Ring, you will continue on to the other volumes and then beyond that, and you'll eventually return to something like Council of Elrond, and it would make even more sense to you. In the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, who is my favourite character and why? This is an easy one. It's Gandalf. I don't have a huge in-depth explanation about why. It's just, I love every moment Gandalf is on the page. I love the way he interacts with certain characters. Like the hobbits, he interacts with the hobbits in like a different way than he would interact with Elrond or Aragorn, and I just think it says so much about his character the way he does that. He's so well written, but it has that mix of the seriousness and like the grumpy old man with a bit of humour and a little bit of mystery about him. With I don't know if you're first reading Lord of the Rings, like who is he? What's a wizard? And you can tell that there's a great kind of power there, and that's kind of cloaked, but great wisdom as well. I love that moment in many meetings where Gandalf is the wizard that was going to the Shire and he's good with fireworks and everything, but when they're in this hall with Elrond and these other lords, Gandalf's up there with them in a position of kind of honour, and we're kind of viewing him as what the hobbits would view him. They're suddenly realising there's something different about him. With Gandalf the Grey, just these moments in like Moria, his confrontation with the Balrog, he's almost like that window into the wider Legendarium. He's telling us more about the kind of magic of Middle Earth and the greater things that exist in it, but we are viewing him through the eyes of like maybe one of the hobbits. And there's not a moment that I don't enjoy when Gandalf's on the page. I think he has some of the best quotes as well, especially when he's talking to the council, or when he's talking to Saruman. I love his confrontation with Saruman at Orthanc, and especially with Frodo lamenting that he's been led to this place. He has the ring, wishing it never came to him, and Gandalf reassuring him that basically the ring's been led to Frodo. It seems like you were meant to have it, and it should be reassuring. It can kind of spark a bit of hope, you know, and or maybe quotes about, oh, Bilbo should have. It's a pity that, you know, Bilbo stayed his hand, you know, in killing Gollum, and Gandalf's very quick to say, you know, don't deal out death and judgment, and everything he just says just seems like not just logical, but it just seems right. And Tolkien really put a lot of thought into what he was having Gandalf say, and I think he's just got the best quotes in the story. And we're not just being told that he's wise, it's demonstrated over and over again. It's sometimes when characters are written, it's especially when authors self-insert themselves into some character who's amazing at everything and they've no weaknesses and all that, we're just told how great they are. Gandalf demonstrates it with how he's written. It's when we're told he's wise, we see his wisdom and we experience it. He's also involved in one of the greatest emotional parts of the Fellowship of the Ring, when he stands against the Balrog and falls to protect everyone. You feel that loss for the rest of the story, especially when they're in Lothlorien and they're mourning Gandalf. You can really feel that he was so important to the quest, and everyone's a little bit lost without him. And you get kind of emotional because of he's been there from chapter 1. He's so likeable. He's got a history in the text through the Hobbit as well, and yeah, this is an easy one to answer again. I like other characters. I really like Frodo in the Fellowship of the Ring, as I've said before, with not liking how he was handled in like adaptations. I think in terms of development, he's got the greatest development in that book. I really like Aragorn as well. his journey to becoming king. I find him just a really likeable character. But Gandalf stands at the top, and I'm sure he's many other people's favourite as well. I know people have a soft spot for Sam, but it's Gandalf. It's always Gandalf. He's my favourite, one of my favourite Tolkien characters. Out of all the good characters, he's probably my favourite. I've got a soft spot for all the villains because I like how they have a story that led them to become villains. I think they've always got the best character development because there must be a reason for their fall, and Tolkien says that there's no story without a fall. So I think he writes the evil characters really well, but Gandalf's got such care and effort put into his character, and as I've said at the beginning here, every moment in Fellowship where Gandalf's there is a great moment. Everything he says, it's all just top tier all the time, and Tolkien made a good decision with what happened in Moria, because it's like a gut punch. You actually do feel the loss of Gandalf at that moment, just as everyone else does, and that's a sure sign that he's a very well written character, in my opinion. I'm going to put these two questions together because they are related. It's if I prefer the book or the movie version of The Fellowship of the Ring, and what's my opinion on that movie and how it compares to the book. So we're talking about the Peter Jackson movie version there. And I am aware that some of you have probably watched the movie, but I know that you're all going to have to watch it anyway, and do a kind of comparison with the book, which I think is a good thing. And it's quite rare nowadays, if any of you have never watched the movie, to have read it first. The movies are just so popular that a lot of people who will never read Lord of the Rings, or maybe would go into it later, would watch the movie first. So it's good if any of you are doing it the other way around, because that's the way I did it as well. But the first question is the easiest one I'd answer on this video. It's the book by a distance. I know they're different. It's a different medium, and even if I put Fellowship of the Ring movie in my top 3 ever, probably. I've seen it loads and loads and loads of times. I think I went to cinema about 10 times to see it or something when it was first out. And I love it. I think it's a great movie. It doesn't compare to the book. If you told me I had to give up one of them, I'd instantly say take the movie away. I get a lot more from the book. It's so much more in depth, offers me so much more. It's not just an entertainment thing for 3 or 4 hours, that even though I really enjoy it, I get a lot more from the book. So that's a no-brainer. I'll probably watch the movie many, many, many more times, but I'll be reading the Fellowship of the Ring and the Lord of the Rings as a whole until I basically can't read it anymore. So it allows me to give a bit of an opinion on the film. I'm someone who, when I've talked about this on live streams or whatever, I often say that even though I really like the movie, I don't see it as an incredible adaptation for some reasons. Okay, people find that a bit strange because I think for most, a good adaptation follows a story that was set in the source material. And Fellowship of the Ring pretty much does. It's out of the 3 movies, it definitely follows the story closest. It's got the least amount of what I would call interference from the writers and director, putting their own ideas and spins on things. Fellowship is closest to the source material, I would say, and it's the easiest one to follow the source material. And I'm not saying it has to be perfect either. Some people get really defensive and weird about this stuff, where they'll say a book can't be perfectly adapted. You can't expect it to be word for word, page for page. I've never said that, but that excuse works for certain things. There are certain things where I say it was either too difficult to put on screen, or you could remove it without completely affecting absolutely everything. And that's because the movie versions have a plot that they're following. It's Frodo going to Mordor. That's the main point of the whole story for the movies. And if something doesn't relate to that, it can be cut. So Tom Bombadil, for example, isn't in the movie. Does it affect the story? No, not really. But it lessens it as an adaptation for me, because I think Tom Bombadil, that whole moment, that whole time spent with him, is important for some of the reasons that Tolkien wrote the story and the themes of the story and the development of characters and this sort of thing. I think it's not always just about the plot. So if you ask me, does it follow the plot pretty well? Yeah, of course it does. But I think adaptations are more than that. And so I'm not talking about little changes to the story and things, but when it comes to something like characters, that's a huge one for me, where I don't think that excuse that I talked about, where we can't do that on screen, I don't think that really works when it comes to the development of, or the way certain characters were implemented. This is especially true in Two Towers: Return of the King, but in Fellowship, a big one I could say is Frodo. I've already talked about him with the most development in the Fellowship. He's pretty bad in the movie. All his moments that contribute to the development of his character are removed, which is a bit wacky to me. And he's seen as people who have just watched the movies as a bit whiny and everyone does everything for him, and I completely get that. I don't defend movie Frodo against those accusations, because that's what he's like. They took away very important moments for Frodo because the plot around those moments wasn't needed to progress the story. So removing the whole Barrow White scenario didn't affect the story, but we then didn't get a pivotal moment in Frodo's development. Wanting Arwen, who's the love of Aragorn's life, wanting her to be more involved in the story, which I think's fine, meant that they replaced a figure like Glorfindel, who again I would have liked to have seen, but it's not a huge issue that it's Arwen. Okay, I'm not getting wound up about that. But in doing so, they gave Arwen a moment that belonged to Frodo. Another great moment of courage and development for Frodo is just removed. And it just seems like others sort of carry him through the story. And these are decisions that when people say, oh, it's because this wouldn't work on screen or that, I don't buy that for the way they implemented certain characters. And that's why I talk about it as an adaptation. It's really, really good for what it is, but I still get a lot more from the books, and I still think an even greater adaptation is theoretically possible, but it will probably never happen now, because it was a miracle that these kind of films got made with such little interference from studios, which would be impossible now because they cost a few $100 million to make. They made about $3 billion or something, and that just gets people involved. And we saw what happened with the Hobbit trilogy. It was a disaster. Still made a lot of money, but I'll probably never watch them again. And we're seeing it with the Rings of Power Amazon show, where things that cost a lot of money, they want to make a lot of money, and you have people involved that don't really care about the source material. I'm not talking about the writers not there, I'm saying like execs and people with the purse strings. Suddenly there's less creative freedom for the makers of these things, because it's all about the money and that. You couldn't make the Lord of the Rings trilogy now with the freedom that the likes of Peter Jackson had at the time. There would be certain decisions that would be out of his hands that would lessen it as a trilogy, I think. So it's for people like me who were around when it was released in the cinema. It was like a huge event that's probably never going to happen again, and that's quite a shame. So that's why I really respect them as films. Possibly the greatest adaptation of it we'll ever get, because anything that costs anything close to that going forward ever again will be ruined by the people involved in it. So yeah, I could talk about story elements being missing, decisions that were just made by the writers because they think this would work better on screen, which I never like. I think you should really respect the author's intentions, but they're still amazing films visually, in terms of certain choices made for actors and performances, the music. I'd always recommend watching them. It's just, I'll always push the books first. I think you get a lot more from the books. They're a lot deeper, a lot more complex and enjoyable for me, but the films are incredible works of art as well. And I'd always say you should check out both. You can get some things from the films that you just don't get from reading as well, so you have to give them credit for that. It's like the soundtrack's a huge thing for me when it comes to that. It's hearing themes for certain people and locations is almost going to change when I read the story now. I can kind of hear those themes in my head, and certain actor choices have affected how I view the characters. Now, I imagine Christopher Lee when I get to the parts with Saruman. So they've got a lot going for them. I still think they could have been better, but you can probably never please me in that regard. But I think there was characters that were not representative of Tolkien's. So Aragorn's another one. I like Viggo Mortensen's performance. I like him as Aragorn, but that Aragorn, the way he acts towards becoming king, doesn't represent Aragorn from the books. Almost like a mythical figure in the books. And I think Viggo Mortensen could have pulled that off, of course, but that's not the way that character was written, because they're thinking of movies. That's a huge problem for me, where, well, we couldn't have Aragorn already want to be king, we have to invent this conflict. And a lot of people seem to like that more, but it's very movie trope to me instead of the way the character was actually written and the reasons he was written that way. But then you get figures like Gandalf, who I think were excellent in the movie. Almost couldn't have done it better. That mix of the importance and authority, but with a bit of humour and seriousness, but the way he talks to the hobbits, and it's just, I think he was written really well, which shows they could have written other ones well, but they made decisions that changed them for the purposes of a film. And yeah, I'll always have problems when it comes to that. But yeah, so book always number one, of course. But I do like the movie. I'm really fond of Fellowship of the Ring, and out of the three, it's the one that I can watch with the least complaints, and I do kind of view it as its own thing. I have problems with it as an adaptation, but it's a remarkable film, and it's still not a bad adaptation, of course, nowhere near it. And yeah, now that you've read Fellowship, you will notice differences. You will expect certain characters to show up that don't. You'll wonder why certain things don't happen, but I just have a problem with important character development or events related to Tolkien's actual writing just being replaced for the benefit of a general movie audience. I don't think it's worth doing that, but that's why I don't have 300 million to make the movies, because I wouldn't be thinking about that. Why do you think Tolkien skipped Tom Bombadil's backstory? Well, Lord of the Rings is written by characters within the story That's the whole way it's meant to be structured and presented to us. Tolkien's the translator of texts, and he's not really the author. That's the way it's kind of presented. So there are things in the story that those figures don't know. There are mysteries to them. It's one reason why, for example, the figures like the blue wizards don't really get mentioned much. They're irrelevant to the events that are unfolding in the Lord of the Rings, possibly. And figures like Bilbo and Frodo and that are writing these texts don't know what to write about them. But of course that's not a great excuse when we have external texts like letters and essays from Tolkien where he could explain certain things. But even when he does that, he writes in a certain way where he is the guy who could have made up any backstory for anyone because he's created the Legendarium. Even when he talks about the likes of the Blue Wizards, he's almost telling us like he doesn't know. He would have had to have sat and consciously thought up something about it, but there's this kind of magical explanation he sometimes gives where he's like, it's possible that this or that, or we don't really know this, and as if he's like another reader instead of the creator of the whole thing. But with Tom Bombadil, there's a quote from letter 144 where he talks about a clash. Well, I'll just read the quote. There is of course a clash between literary technique and the fascination of elaborating in detail an imaginary mythical age. Mythical, not allegorical. My mind does not work allegorically. As a story, I think it is good that there should be a lot of things unexplained, especially if an explanation actually exists. And I have perhaps from this point of view erred in trying to explain too much and give too much past history. Many readers have, for instance, rather stuck at the Council of Elrond, and even in a mythical age there must be some enigmas, as there always are. Tom Bombadil is one intentionally. So it's quite funny there that my favourite chapter, the Council of Elrond, for reasons I provided in my original video about the history and the sheer depth of what we're getting told, Tolkien thinks of trying to explain too much, almost like that huge Council of Elrond chapter went too far for him. But it's one reason I really like that chapter, because it's one of the few ones where we do get this huge backstory and history. But he directly says there as well that Tom Bombadil is an intentional enigma. There's a fascination in elaborating the imaginary world, but it's a mythical age we're talking about, and not everything can be explained. And Tom Bombadil, I think, if he was fully explained, his full backstory explained, we probably wouldn't be talking about him just now. He's fascinating for many because he is an enigma, and some people are incapable of allowing enigmas to exist. They have to explain them. You'll have loads of people out there who will tell you who Tom Bombadil is and what he is, and I just always say, don't listen to them if they say it's well, you can discuss it, you can discuss what he is, who he is, it's like a fun discussion. But if they tell you for a fact what he is, like the author David Day, for example, always says that Tom Bombadil is a Maya, and it's not written anywhere that he is. Don't listen to these people when they tell you that, because this is the quote you should be going to, that he's an intentional enigma, he's not explained, and that adds to the magic of him. If we got to his chapters and we just said, oh yeah, he's this type of being, it's like, okay, that's just a moment in the story we go through. But we kind of pass into this fairy tale stage of the story in the very first book, where the hobbits leave the Shire, they leave their comfort of their home, and they're starting their journey, and they pass into, when they go through the old forest and they're coming to the other side, they pass through this land with this being dwelling in it, where it's just strange. He's a strange being. They don't know what he is, so we don't know. he's doing things that don't make much sense to us. Is he appearing out of thin air? How's he coming at all these chance moments? And why is he like that with the ring? And why is he always singing? No, it's just that he's such a strange figure, and that strangeness would be gone if Tolkien just said, oh, he's this. So I think this is a mix of the literary technique that Tolkien's talking about and the fascination with elaborating. He makes this character more fascinating by not elaborating, and we'll never know, because we have all the text, we'll never know what Tom Bombadil truly is, and that's a good reason for skipping his backstory. We have enough backstory for figures that we need to know about. We don't actually need to know Tom's backstory for what he does in the main story. And yes, for a completionist's sake, so I'd like to have it elaborated, but for someone like me, I don't really want it elaborated. I like certain events, certain figures popping up, where after it you're just thinking about what the possibilities could be, and that makes Middle-earth more realistic, more in-depth, more magical as well. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with magical mysteries existing in this secondary world. Do you think Tom Bombadil is Eru? This is a very, very, very common idea that people often discuss. It's one of the prevalent theories about Tom Bombadil, and it's one that's very easy to answer because Tolkien plainly states, text you'll see on screen now, that there is no embodiment of the One, of God, who indeed remains remote outside the world and only directly accessible to the Valar or rulers. And later he also says, there is no embodiment of the Creator anywhere in this story or mythology. That's pretty definitive there in what Tolkien's saying, that no, the Creator or Eru or God is not physically in the story. But it's something I just want to talk about a little bit more about this, where Tolkien's own beliefs, I think, really play a part here. And I think, even though I've just said with these quotes that he's not in the story, that should be the end of it, I think there's a little bit more thought should go into it as to why Tom Bombadil wouldn't be Eru or God in the story. And it's to do with something that if you do get more into Tolkien and more studying aspects of his story, how he created the story and what certain things mean, you'll come across eucatastrophe, which is a word that Tolkien himself coined. So I'm just reading here from Tolkien Gateway, their page on eucatastrophe, because it just sums it up pretty well, where they say that in essence, a eucatastrophe is a massive turn in fortune from a seemingly unconquerable situation to an unforeseen victory, usually brought by grace rather than heroic effort. Such a turn is catastrophic in the sense of its breadth and surprise, and positive in that a great evil or misfortune is averted. So the turn is catastrophic because of the breadth and surprise, positive and that the great evil's averted. So it's a eucatastrophe. The eu comes from Greek and good, blah blah. And if I read another quote here from letter 89, I just want to really explain what this eucatastrophe thing is before I explain why Tom Bombadil being Eru would make no sense. So this is quite a long quote here, but I coined the word eucatastrophe, the sudden happy turn in a story which pierces you with a joy that brings tears, which I argued it is the highest function of fairy stories to produce. And I was there led to the view that it produces its peculiar effect, because it is a sudden glimpse of truth. Your whole nature chained in material cause and effect, the chain of death, feels a sudden relief, as if a major limb out of joint had suddenly snapped back. It perceives, if the story has literary truth on the second plane, that this is indeed how things really do work in the great world for which our nature is made. And I concluded by saying that the resurrection was the greatest eucatastrophe possible in the greatest fairy story, and produces that essential emotion, Christian joy, which produces tears because it is qualitatively so like sorrow, because it comes from those places where joy and sorrow are at one, reconciled, as selfishness and altruism are lost in love. So some very important points to make there, which when he says truth, sudden glimpse of truth is capitalised. He's talking about the truth, and this is Tolkien's faith come into play here. And he talks about the literary truth, quote, small t truth, quote, on the second plane in these kind of stories. And that resonates in the primary world, the great world, and he is talking about his faith here. And Tolkien says that the incarnation of God was a eucatastrophe, and that the resurrection of Jesus was the eucatastrophe of the incarnation. Now, I'm saying all that stuff, again, sharing Tolkien's views here. That's nothing to do with mine, but we're talking about him. To me, even as a non-believer or anything, I think it was so strange then, with all this, the importance of the eucatastrophe in terms of that Christian joy that he's talking about, the saying that the resurrection is the greatest eucatastrophe possible and the greatest fairy story. Having Tom Bombadil be the incarnation of God seems very unreasonable when Tolkien sees a eucatastrophe as the incarnation of God, a great joy at a time when you're not expecting it, and from that you get an even greater eucatastrophe, which is the resurrection. And why would Tom Bombadil then be the incarnation of God? In this alternate history that leads to our own, Tolkien would view that Jesus would be the incarnation, and that would come later in the histories. That's how we'd view it. Tom Bombadil singing and dancing along with Goldberry in the forest picking lilies, and that's not a eucatastrophe. He's not bringing about a great joy and change in the world at a time when it's at its lowest. That's why I think it's unreasonable to think that Tom Bombadil would be God, because Tolkien took that pretty seriously. With it's like the two greatest moments were the incarnation of God and resurrection. So you don't have to be a Christian to then say Tom Bombadil being Eru would be something that just wouldn't make sense to Tolkien. Of course, you can just read those quotes I put at the beginning, but I just wanted to give a little bit more detail about this idea of eucatastrophe and how it relates to God, and that Bombadil's unusual enigmatic nature, his attitude to power, and just this whole mysterious aura is not equivalent to being the creator, especially to the devout Catholic Tolkien. It just makes absolutely no sense to me to think that he could even be anything like Eru. What's a theory you have on who Tom Bombadil is? I don't typically have a theory. I'm someone who really goes in for the idea that Tom, as Tolkien says, is an intentional enigma. And I really don't want to know exactly what he is, but I like talking about why he's in the story and what he represents and his place in the story, which I think's well deserved, rather than he is this type of being. There's a lot of people who do that, and they think it's some sort of Occam's razor where they'll say, well, he can't be a dwarf for this reason, he can't be an elf for this reason, he can't be this for that reason, and they usually end up saying he's a Maya, like Sauron or Gandalf or Saruman. And they say, well, he can't be anything else. And I think that's very limiting. Takes a bit of the magic away and groups absolutely everything into these little categories where if you're not this, then you have to be this, and instead of what if there are other things out there. And I vastly prefer that. But as a quote from letter 144, Tom Bombadil is not an important person to the narrative. I suppose he has some importance as a comment. I mean, I do not really write like that. He's just an invention who first appeared in the Oxford magazine about 1933, and he represents something that I feel important, though I would not be prepared to analyse the feeling precisely. I would not, however, have left him in if he did not have some kind of function. So to me, Tom Bombadil is a representation of a natural pacifist. So to go into a little bit more detail about that, if Tolkien said he would not leave Tom Bombadil in the story if he didn't serve a function, he can still lack importance to the narrative. It's one reason why he gets left out of adaptations where they just focus on the plot. They just want the story to go forward. They're not caring about these deeper themes, which means that's why you get people who say, well, it makes sense that Tom was cut out from the Peter Jackson movies, for example, because he stops the story and the plot comes to a halt, and you can cut him out without missing a beat. And yeah, in terms of the story, you can do that, but it represents something more. And if you were wanting a truly good adaptation of a text, you would care about these deeper themes. But if I paraphrase Tolkien from that same letter, he says that the story's cast in good and evil, terms of good and evil, beauty against ruthless ugliness, tyranny against kingship, moderated freedom with consent against compulsion that has lost any object save mere power. Both sides, conservative or destructive, want some kind of control. If you have renounced control and take delight in things for themselves without reference to yourself, watching, observing and knowing, then the rights and wrongs of power can become meaningless to you. The means of power become valueless. It is the view of the natural pacifist which comes to mind in times of war. The view of Rivendell is that it is an excellent thing to have represented, but there are things with which it cannot cope, and upon its existence nonetheless depends. I think Tom Bombadil fits that very well. He's not... It'd be very weird if people said he was evil in some way. But in terms of being good, I'm not saying he's neutral, right? But I'm just saying, in terms of being good, surely to be good, you'd act in some way for good against evil. It's not a binary thing. I'm not saying if you're not evil, then you're good, and if you're not good, you're evil. But to me, it's like goodness would be some attempt, if you could, to challenge an evil. But Tolkien confirms that, despite Tom's position as a natural pacifist, he would still require victory for the West if he wanted to continue or survive. If Sauron wins, there's nothing left for Tom, and it means that the ring of power, the One Ring, as we see in the chapters with Tom Bombadil, it becomes useless in the hands of a pacifist, basically. If his view was upheld by others, then he would fail. Pacifism then becomes just an ideal, and it can't be really allowed in the real world when there is evil to fight. So if an evil like Sauron exists, the pacifists must face it, or they could be destroyed. There's another quote here I've got. It's again to do with this kind of pacifism. It's from Unfinished Tales. It's a completely different story. Eldarion and Arendis, the mariner's wife. But it's, I am in too great doubt to rule, to prepare or to let be, to prepare for war, which is yet only guessed. Train craftsmen and tillers in the midst of peace for blood spilling and battle, Put iron in the hands of greedy captains who will love only conquest, and count the slain as their glory. Will they say to Eru, at least your enemies were amongst them, or to fold hands, while friends die unjustly? Let men live in blind peace until the ravisher is at the gate. What then will they do? Match naked hands against iron and die in vain? Or flee, leaving the cries of women behind them? Will they say to Eru, at least I spilled no blood? I should quote again, I've got another quote here, letter 64. It says, the utter stupid waste of war, not only material but moral and spiritual, is so staggering to those who have to endure it, and always was despite the poets, and always will be despite the propagandists. Not of course that it has, not is, and will be necessary to face it in an evil world. And that was said in like 1944, very apt. But this is what I really discuss with Tom Bombadil. It's his position in the story, what he represents, his place there in terms of good and evil, and the role you have to play when there's this direct threat. I'm not saying it's Tolkien criticising Tom Bombadil necessarily, but we've met this character who hasn't really taken a side, but who you would still have to fight for in terms of goodness to allow to continue to exist. He's not even fighting for his own existence. He's just naturally letting things play out, and I just think it makes him quite an interesting character. But in terms of what he is, again, I don't really like answering that, but there are some interesting ideas from the very early Legendarium where things existed before the Ainur, that's the Valar and the Maiar, descended into the physical world itself, as if they were made when the world was brought into being. So Tolkien did have names for these beings that entered the world, but they existed separately from the Ainur that we know of, and they're separate from the elves. There are figures I've talked to before, quite prominent Tolkien scholars online, who just seem to think that every spirit at that time created was an Ainu. So even if you talk about these ones that I'm going to talk about, they just get grouped in with them, and I still don't think that's really right. But there's a quote here, and it's from the very first History of Middle-earth volume, the Book of Lost Tales, Part 1, the first chapters of Quenta Silmarillion, so it's quite early here. About them fared a great host, who are the sprites of trees and woods, of dale and forest and mountainside, or those that sing amid the grass at morning and chant among the standing corn at eve. These are the Nermir and the Tevari, Nandini and Orosi, brownies, fays, pixies, leprons, and what else are they not called? For their number is very great, yet must they not be confused with the Eldar, for they were born before the world, and are older than its oldest, and are not of it, but laugh at it much, for had they not somewhat to do with its making, so that it is for the most part a play for them. But the Eldar are of the world, and love it with a great and burning love, and are wistful in all their happiness for that reason. So we have all these ideas about a doll that influenced Tom Bombadil's inclusion, the Adventures of Tom Bombadil book, and he gets included here. Some sort of reference to nature, the countryside, the natural pacifist role I talked about. But I really find this quote interesting because it reads like it's talking about Tom Bombadil. Born before the world, older than its oldest. They laugh at it much. It's a play for them. They sing amid the grass at morning. I think it makes more sense to say Tom Bombadil's a nature forest kind of spirit, and a great one that still remains, possibly as other spirits have gone as the world unfolds and those within it spread across it. They might still be lingering in forests and mountainside and all these places unseen, but Tom Bombadil's still got a presence there. And I'm not saying he is a forest spirit. He's one of these Nermir or Tervari or Nandini and all of that, but he could be one of these. And what else are they not called? For the numbers very great, and he could be a great one among them, or something like that. I think that makes more sense than assigning him as some servant of some Vala or something like that. Yeah, that's what I'll say about that. It's one of these things that I think is really down to the reader. You can enjoy the story any way you want, and when you have these enigmatic figures like Tom Bombadil, defining him, boxing him in, goes against the nature of his inclusion, in my opinion.
Why do you think that Tolkien would have Saruman do so little as a villain? Now, I don't know how to answer this one fully, because if we're talking about just the Fellowship of the Ring, which I know you've all read, I don't want to give away stuff in the future from the later in the Lord of the Rings. But Saruman's not finished from the Fellowship of the Ring. So I'm trying to be careful with the words here because I don't want to spoil it, but there's more Saruman to come. And in lieu of Sauron being the chief present kind of villain in the story, he's like the looming presence in the story, the greater threat. Saruman's the one at these stages in the story that we're really dealing with. But the way Lord of the Rings is written, it's following our main characters. It's something that like the movies would change, for example, because we can't really have private conversations with Saruman and his servants, because if none of our figures are there, they can't do that. But in the movies they can do that kind of thing and make it up or whatever. So there's a lot of Saruman that we don't see, but he has a greater role to still play, and I think it is an important role. He's definitely a villain that the heroes really have to deal with, as well as Sauron. And Saruman's closer, he's more directly involved, and I wouldn't say he does so little. A lot of these evil schemes and that we're just not seeing because, like I said, it's the way the text is written, but he's got a very important role to play in the themes of the story as well. That's all really important, because there's 3 real big themes that Tolkien discusses that resonate through the Legendarium, and it's the fall, mortality, and the machine. Those are the 3. And Saruman really is a representation of, I would say, 2 of them. The fall is a huge one. Like Tolkien says, basically, you can't have a story without the fall. And Saruman, when we meet him, which you should remember from the Council of Elrond, when Gandalf talks about riding to Orthanc to meet with Saruman, then realising that Saruman had betrayed the Order and basically the free folk of Middle-earth, you realise that we've not really seen Saruman from before. We are now introduced to this character who has fallen and is falling deeper into evil, basically, by any means necessary kind of figure, and one who sees power as authority. Or authority as power. It's those with the power should have authority over others, and it's for their good. He's got that kind of attitude. The machine, which a lot of people will relate to industrialization, the destruction of nature, which, that's definitely an important thing, and Saruman really represents that. The destruction of Fangorn Forest and his disregard for other living things to grow his own empire. The machine's really more about not focusing so much on internal growth and betterment, but the externalization of your will or power in order to have your plans and schemes and devices and control over something that you're holding personal, not personal to yourself. Saruman's really representative of that, as figures like Sauron are as well. Saruman doesn't want to grow in his own wisdom like someone like Gandalf would. Saruman wants to rise in power and grow his empire, and he does that through the externalization of his will, through attempting to control rational beings and spending his power to increase his power on Earth. It's what a lot of these evil figures in Tolkien do. And I could get into depth about that, the machine and the fall and all of that, but Saruman's really important for all this. And something that should be more obvious is, and if you're wanting more talk about my fall of Saruman, my very first video on my channel was about Saruman turning to evil, and I remade it into a better version, I think. So that's linked in the description as well. I think that's worth watching to understand Saruman a bit more. But a very kind of basic thing could be that we're seeing almost like an evil Gandalf. That's such a basic way to look at it, but you do get introduced to Radagast briefly in Lord of the Rings, and you see that he's not really very much involved, but Saruman's involved and Gandalf's involved. They're the main two figures, the main two wizards that are involved in this conflict. And Gandalf could be like Saruman. He could abuse his power. He could try to defeat Sauron through, not by any means, at the expense of independent wills and freedoms, just to achieve that goal and use the power he has to do it. But he doesn't. He's not an evil figure. He actually has wisdom and cares about others. But Saruman does have great power and authority, and they're of the same order. And he's Gandalf's superior. And Tolkien could have gone no further than the conflict between Saruman and Gandalf at Orthanc, and I would have probably still been satisfied with it, because it tells us so much about Gandalf's attitude and what Gandalf could become and what Saruman once was. We're seeing that conflict play out there. I think it's one of the best moments in the Fellowship, so I would have been happy with that. But it does have more to come, and I think a lot of Saruman's strengths as a character comes down to not necessarily what he does, but what he represents in the story. He should be a character that if you were asked to write a big essay on him, something like the abuse of power, which I wrote for my English studies at school, that was what my paper was on. It was the abuse of power in The Lord of the Rings, and he was a huge focus, Saruman. That makes him an interesting character. He doesn't have to be ever present in the story to be interesting, but as I've said a few times, there is more to come from Saruman as well.
Do you feel like Boromir's betrayal was a good way to end the book? Well, the interesting thing is here, Lord of the Rings is meant to be read as one novel. There are 6 books in it, but if it was all read as one novel as it was intended, you wouldn't have some sort of event at the end of the book where you go, I have to wait for the next one to read it or something like that. But it would have been like that back in the day when it was getting printed. If Fellowship of the Ring got published on its own, you had to wait for the Two Towers, and you obviously don't need to do that now. But in terms of Boromir's actions, I've kind of looked into this before with the way these books are structured, and I think it's a good case to make that the first chapter of The Two Towers, which I'm sure most of you haven't read yet, so I'm not going to get in detail about it, but it's a very short chapter, and it really feels like it's a part of the last chapter of The Fellowship of the Ring. And just to clarify what I was just saying there about not reading it, I'm talking about the students I'm directing these answers to, not any channel viewers. I'm sure most of you have read Two Towers. But that chapter seems like it's really a part of the last chapter of fellowship, the breaking of the fellowship. And it really works that way. But I think the Fellowship of the Ring ending with the breaking of the fellowship is a very natural way to end it. I think having the first chapter of the Two Towers brought into the last chapter of Fellowship would have worked as well. And this is something the Peter Jackson adaptation does, and that feels quite natural as well. But I think ending the Fellowship with its breaking is a very important moment. And it's not really that Boromir's betrayal is the final act of the book. It's really Sam and Frodo going on their way and descending down into the Emyn Muil, and they're on their journey now. But that's what it's all about. The Fellowship is broken. The ring bearer and his companion are on their own, and what's going to happen with the other figures. Boromir's betrayal was a catalyst for it, where Frodo then starts to think, I don't want this to happen to others, I don't want to be a burden to others, this is the burden I decide to carry and bear, and it's better if I go on my own. But of course Sam goes with him. That's really, the Fellowship has to end like that. And this isn't a big spoiler, but as you go into Two Towers and you have this 2-book structure, the Fellowship really has broken. You've now got these characters for an entire book and these other characters for the other book. It's a very good way to end the book. I can't really think of, except maybe bringing in, like I say, that first chapter from Two Towers, I can't really think of a better way to end the book than the Fellowship breaking and us seeing Sam and Frodo begin their separate journey. We are following the ring, and that being the last moment makes sense to me. Yeah, like I say, I can't think of a neater way to then go into the Two Towers, where we start focusing on this other group, and you're wondering, what's going on with Sam and Frodo. It's almost like having to publish these separately back when did lead to some sort of cliffhanger or real desire to get into the next book, when today you can just turn the page and start the next book. But I still think it really works. Should more or less people have gone on the journey to Mordor? This is another difficult one to answer, because I'm trying not to spoil anything for people who haven't read beyond the Fellowship of the Ring. So it's difficult for me to really answer this at any depth without spoiling things. But there's one way we can look at this, and it's basically what Elrond talks about, where at the Council of Elrond, Frodo puts himself forward to continue being the ring bearer and to take the ring as far as he can to Mordor. You'll notice that he's not said that he'll destroy it. He obviously wants to try, but he can't swear some oath to destroy the ring, because it's a very difficult thing to do and it might not be possible for him. So it's more about, I'll carry the ring, we're going to Mordor to destroy it, and I'll take it as far as I can, basically. He won't be alone. As we see at the end of the Council of Elrond, Sam at least will go with him, because he can't be parted from him. And then we go into the Ring Goes South chapter, where we're getting told by Gandalf that there's discussions about who's going to go. And just like the Council of Elrond, which wasn't planned, that's something we need to be very clear about. It was what we'd call a chance meeting in Middle-earth. Various figures were coming to Imladris or Rivendell for various reasons, and they were of different kindreds, and they were arriving when Frodo arrived with the ring, and it seems like the time is right to then discuss it with all these people. That's what we call it, a chance meeting. You could call it fate if you want, but it's more that certain events play out almost as if you're not in control of where you'll be decisions you've made through your free will in the past have kind of led you here, but it's this chance meeting allows for the greater story to play out. It's a whole thing about foreknowledge from the likes of Eru, fate and free will, and you end up having these moments where the plot, according to the author, and I mean Eru is the author, can deviate in some way through the free will of others, but there's like a overarching kind of story that's going to play out. And that's why you get these chance meetings in the world where things can go one way or the other, but it's probably going to lead in some direction, and you start to feel like there's some power at work. I mean, we have that with something like in The Hobbit, when Gandalf meets Thorin Oakenshield to basically go on the quest of Erebor. Gandalf feels that he was meant to be there at that time to meet this figure. It's a chance meeting. You have other ones like in the Fellowship of the Ring, Frodo meeting Gildor and the High Elves. It's like, oh, some people might go, well, that's convenient. It's like it's a chance meeting, and the Council of Elrond is one of those, and it's why Elrond is so confident that there's something greater at work here, and Gandalf's kind of got that feeling. So when they're working out who's going to go, it's no one has to swear some sort of oath to go with Frodo. He's the one that's been charged through coming forward to take the ring, to have these rules that would be followed, like don't give the ring to others unless in dire need, and it has to be someone from the company that's going to go with you. Elrond, through seeing this as chance, when he's gathering these people together, it should be 9. It should be 9 because against you will be the 9 servants of Sauron, the Nazgul. So as these figures are, I'm travelling to Minas Tirith, I'm going here, it's like the group starts to come together, and Elrond thinks 9 seems right. Gandalf's going to go. This is his great task in Middle-earth, and the culmination of his journeys. This should be his final act. Aragorn's going to go. The sword will be reforged, and he's going to go on this journey and reveal himself as the king. He's supposed to go to Minas Tirith, and with him will go Boromir, because Boromir is going to travel back to Minas Tirith. Representing other kindred, you're going to have Gimli for the dwarves, and him and his father didn't come to talk about the One Ring. They came because of another issue, but they're going to be represented, and Legolas will represent the elves, and other positions start to get filled up. And then we have this moment where Elrond's considering members of his household to be these final 2 positions, and Gandalf basically says that's not going to help us. An elf lord like Glorfindel, a great being of real power, on this mission of secrecy and stealth, that's not really needed, so to speak. We need to think about Frodo and what's going to help him the most, and that's why Gandalf thinks like friendship will be of a greater benefit than a great elf lord. This is when there's a debate about the last 2 hobbits going, but again, even that, it just seems right. The 4 hobbits that made their way to Rivendell go, and then these other figures. And again, I don't want to ruin the rest of the story, but it seems right, as Elrond would put it, when we talk about these chance encounters, chance meetings, fate seeming to dictate that this is the way things should go, that they just feel that it's right that these 9 Black Riders have these 9 walkers set against them. If you had fewer people going, it's like who gets removed from that group? The hobbits, who were the last ones to join, basically say, even if you say that we can't go, we're going to follow anyway. You'd have to send them home in sacks, basically. And then you think of everyone else that's there. Boromir's obviously going to go. Aragorn, Gandalf, and the other kindreds need to be represented. It's a Middle-earth problem. They want to be involved. You can't really take any others away. You could add more, but then when you think about that, it's what benefit will there be if they wanted more to go? Then that discussion about Glorfindel and maybe others, possibly the Sons of Elrond, or someone like that, they would still just go. It wouldn't be like it's the Hobbits or Glorfindel. They've decided it's 9 because again they feel it's right, but if they really, really wanted more people to go, they could have just said, alright, the Hobbits can go, but these figures are still going to go. And then you've suddenly got a huge squad of people trying to be moving in secret towards Mordor, and 9 may seem like a large number, but 12 would be larger. It's and what benefit would it be? It's a larger group just draws more attention, more potential for something to go wrong, to get noticed. Just I don't see the point, and obviously they didn't either. So I can't say that less than 9 should have gone. It seems right that there's 9, according to everything, and more would have not been an advantage. 9 seems like a bit of a limit there, and there wouldn't be any real benefit. I don't see how extra people will make it easier for Frodo to get to Mordor. So I would say it's right that 9 was the number. Why were the wizards different colours? We don't know the answer to this one, but there are some theories people put out, such as the role that the wizard has to play, the personality of the wizard. Could be a mixture of both, it could be neither. Tolkien may have just wanted to distinguish between them, but I think it's quite telling that the head of the order is white. The combination of all colours creates white, and it's a purity. That's the kind of symbol, and that's what makes it such a big deal when Saruman breaks that and calls himself Saruman of many colours. He's trying to break away from the role that led him to Middle-earth, the restrictions of his colour. He's Saruman of many colours. He's capable of doing far more than why he was sent. It's symbolic of that. I think that makes sense. But then you have someone like Gandalf the Grey, where some people talk about to wander unseen and to be in the background and not be on display as much as someone like Saruman in white. And he can't be white because that's the head of the order, that's the greatest of them, should be white. But then you have Gandalf before making the journey, as the wizards, as the Maiar who had become the Astari were getting gathered. He returned from some journey in Valinor, and when he met with Manwë, he was already clad in grey. That could just be associated with Olorin, who is Gandalf, and this could be from Nienna, one of the Valar, who wore a grey raiment as well, and Gandalf did learn from her. It's quite possible that these figures already wore these robes, but then, or wore these colours when they appeared physically like this. But then you have the head of the order who's white, and it makes sense that he's white. That's what I'm saying. It could be a mixture. Maybe the head of the order was always going to be like that, and the others would just have different colours. But what about Radagast? Radagast is associated with the flora and fauna of Middle-earth, and he was brown. That makes sense as well. Maybe he could have worn green. It's just, we don't really know, unfortunately. And the blue, that's an even bigger mystery. There's 2 of them and they both wear blue. Does it associate with the Valar or the Vala that taught each of them as their master or masters? We don't know. But I think it's maybe a mixture. It works out that certain figures will wear certain robes for their position and related to their personalities, which may have led them into those positions in the first place. But unfortunately, this is one where I can't give a definitive answer. I think at least one of them is a symbolic representation of the role, but it could be that the colours are just associated with the personalities of each wizard, or Tolkien just wanted to distinguish them in some very visible way. What would have happened if Gandalf kept the ring for himself? As I've mentioned in earlier questions about decisions that were made at the council and ways to defeat Sauron, it is possible to defeat him without destroying the ring, but you'd essentially be replacing him. That's what I've been saying. It's because if you're able to completely bend the ring and the power within it to your own will, breaking that connection with Sauron, so it's not in rapport with him anymore, it's not his, which is a potential risk for creating the ring in the first place. So think about it as Sauron's inherent power being externalized into a ring, which is now part of the physical world, and he gets benefits from that, of course, if he uses it, if he's holding it, but others potentially can then bend that power to their own will. That's something that wouldn't have been possible if the power had remained within Sauron, because it'd be his, it'd be naturally his. But he's externalized it, he's put it into an object in the world for his own benefit. But now it can potentially be lost to him. That's his big fear during Lord of the Rings. He doesn't fear people destroying the ring. He doesn't think they're capable of that. He thinks on his own terms. He thinks that anyone with wisdom, anyone with any sort of power would act like he would, and he wouldn't destroy that. He would want to use it. So bending that power to your own will to Sauron is the same as destroying it, because it would no longer be his. It would belong to this potential new Lord of the Rings. And I do talk about this with Gandalf in a dedicated video, which I've linked in the description as well. Gandalf as the Lord of the Rings. I recommend that for a more detailed look, but I'll just be quite brief here since I have a dedicated video, and I'll quote from letter 246, where after Tolkien's described mortals like Aragorn being incapable of holding the ring from Sauron despite still being able to use it, that's different from owning it, becoming its master. Anyone can use the One Ring according to their own stature, but completely being in control of it, utilising it to its full potential, bending it to your own will, is reserved for very great figures. And he talks about the potential of the likes of Galadriel, who you remember from the Mirror of Galadriel chapter, gets offered the ring and passes her test and rejects it. He talks about the likes of Galadriel possibly being deceived into thinking they could master it, and the likes of Elrond as well. But Gandalf, he said, I'll quote from the letter, "Of the others, only Gandalf might be expected to master him, being an emissary of the powers and a creature of the same order, an immortal spirit taking a visible physical form." And later in the same letter, he says, "Gandalf as Ring Lord would have been far worse than Sauron. He would have remained righteous but self-righteous. He would have continued to rule and order things for good and the benefit of his subjects according to his wisdom, which was and would have remained great." So this is quite a popular quote from Tolkien, because no one really expects to be told that Gandalf as Lord of the Rings would be worse than Sauron. We're so used to Sauron basically being like the second greatest incarnation of evil in history of Arda. But Tolkien's being quite specific here about what this means. He talks about righteousness, self-righteousness, and that's because Sauron, to his enemies now, was understood, and all the previous desires to achieve some sort of good through his power had long gone. There was a time when Sauron's master Morgoth had fallen, that Sauron didn't immediately just fall back into evil. He wanted to heal Middle Earth from its hurts, but according to his will again, and he fell back into evil because Morgoth had such a stranglehold on him, and he'd been committing evil acts and having his own way, having his own designs for so long that it was very easy for him, as someone with power, to abuse that power and use it for his own benefit. It allowed him to slide back into not considering rational beings as not being deserving of their independence, and he like I said with my talk about Saruman, an earlier question, he has that pride and ego where his will is the way, and everyone should fall in line because I'm the greatest, I've got the most power, I've got the authority, it's for everyone's benefit if I get my own way. Eru and the Valar have apparently abandoned Middle Earth, and I'm the greatest being that remains, so why can't I have it my way? It'll be better for everyone. It's this kind of attitude, and you've got someone with real power here, where your average person would see them as some sort of god, basically, and it's no surprise that Sauron can fall back into evil. But by the time we've reached this third age, there's no deceit there. He's not able to really hide that he's wanting to rule Middle Earth by this stage. So that's what makes Gandalf quite a frightening prospect, because Tolkien's saying that through his righteousness and self-righteousness, he would still have continued to rule and order things for good. This is like an insidious kind of ringlord, where all these other great figures and the people following him would think that it was for their benefit. You would be serving under a tyrant, but wanting to serve under a tyrant, thinking that it was something good, because this is Gandalf. Gandalf's good. He's now overthrown Sauron, and he's going to show us. He's going to show us the way. He's going to show us again, like how to heal Middle Earth and how to get everything back on track, and he'll be our Lord, basically, and King, and that would be a great thing, because again, it's Gandalf and he knows what's good. But you're still under a tyrant, and that's you're being forced to be good, which some people might say, oh, it's better that than forced to be bad or something, but I'm just meaning it's still that your independence, your ability to accept what's good and follow that path, or reject the potential of a fall, which every rational being should have the potential to reject an evil path and accept the good one. And that's what your rationality is, that's what your willpower is. If you're not given that choice, that's tyrannical, even if it's for good. That's what's quite evil about this idea. You're forced onto the good path and thinking it's good. That's quite a horrible thought. And there's a quote I use in the video, which I'm just going to say here. It's actually from C.S. Lewis, and I think it's a really apt one for this discussion, from his God in the Dock essays on theology, making of modern theology. Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep, his cupidity may at some point be satiated, but those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. That's a perfect summation of Gandalf as Lord of the Rings. That's the most interesting thing to think about with Gandalf keeping the ring for himself. It's not as important to think, well, what would actually happen. It'd be a case of either this confrontation with Sauron, which would potentially have Gandalf bend the ring to his own will, because the ring itself would be torn between returning to its rightful owner, who doesn't physically hold it at the moment, and someone of great power who currently holds it. It's a contest, and if Gandalf does that, Sauron's defeated, and the West, quote unquote, wins, but doesn't really. Gandalf becomes the new Sauron, but no one realises it, and everyone thinks it's a good thing that's happened, but Middle-earth's still under a new self-righteous tyrant. That's what would happen, and that's one reason why Gandalf's terrified of being offered the ring, being tempted by the ring. It's not, he doesn't want to be like that, and he's one of the few beings with power who could, if tempted by the ring, could really do something with it. And it's why it's not an option at the council. It's why replace one evil with another, to the point where you'd probably struggle to have anyone try to overthrow him later, because you'd all think that it was a good thing. That's why he's worse than Sauron in that regard.
What is past the sea in Middle-earth? The geography of Middle-earth kind of changes over time through the ages. For example, at the west of it there was Beleriand, which is where the bulk of the Silmarillion takes place. But during the Lord of the Rings in the Third Age, that's not there anymore. There's a couple of little landmarks and places, but the bulk of it's not there. But if you keep going west from that, across the sea, in the Second Age, you would have hit the Isle of Elena, which had the kingdom of Numenor. So most just say the Isle of Numenor once that became the kingdom. And that was raised from the sea by the Valar and their servants, the Maiar. Osu, who's a Maiar servant of the Valar Ulmo, apparently physically was the one that brought that up. And the Valar enriched it and made it habitable, and it was basically like a paradise for men. And certain men sailed over from Middle-earth at the end of the First Age, and they formed a kingdom there that became a very, very great kingdom. But in the Third Age, again in Lord of the Rings, Numenor won't be there. So you would keep going west, and you'd hit the Enchanted Isles and Shadowy Seas, which would sink your ship or get you lost, and you would turn back, and it's basically stopping certain folk from sailing even further west where they shouldn't be going. But if you did, you would hit the Lonely Isle, Tol Eressëa. So very early in the history of Middle-earth, when the earth was lit by two great lamps, and these were destroyed by Sauron's master, Melkor or Morgoth. And this isle had elves that were brought by one of the Valar called Ulmo. And some still dwell there, and others, when they return west from Middle-earth, dwell there. And that's west of the Enchanted Isles that I mentioned. And it's also called Avalone, which those who know their Arthurian legend will know of Avalon, and that's not a coincidence that they're called that. It's in the very early stages of Tolkien's mythology for England idea, there are some references and closer connections to Arthurian myth. Not all of them are carried forward, but names like this can still remain, and that's still Erisea. And if you do go further west than that, you do hit Aman, which is the Undying Lands. So, as I said, when those lamps were destroyed, the Valar left Middle Earth and dwelt on an uninhabited continent at that time, and they made their home there, and it became the Blessed Realm because of who dwelt on it. The Valar became a kind of uncorrupted land. Well, Morgoth corrupted Middle Earth, and this is where you would have Valinor. You may have heard of that term, elves sailing west. That's where they're going, to the halls of Mandos, where that's on the far west of this continent. But Aman it's not heaven. Some people call it that, but we'd probably see it as some sort of paradise. But there's a whole deal about men not dwelling there, but I don't want to get into that just now. But it's an uncorrupted land of bliss, where the Valar dwell, many of the Maiar dwell, many elves dwell, and it has Araman to the north, and Avathar to the south, kind of Darklands to the south, and from the north you would have the Helcaraxe, which was a kind of ice region, which is quite famous in the Silmarillion for an event, and you could cross that over to get to Middle Earth. But yeah, from Aman you would have Taniquetil, which is the largest mountain in creation, and the two trees were there. West of there, from Valmar, you'd go west, you'd have the two trees, and when the lamps were destroyed, the trees were created, and then there's a whole deal about the trees in the Silmarillion, which I don't want to spoil, you should just read it. But you can go even further west. Yenna's halls are there, the halls of Mandos are there, but you can go further west to the outer sea, which is basically the sea that encircles the whole world. So even if you went east, you would still hit the outer sea, and this surrounds the lands of Arda basically, and there's like dark waters that have a kind of unknown distance where you'd end up reaching the what would say like the walls of night, and you're basically going to be leaving creation at that point, the walls of the world and that kind of thing. And you know, in the mythologies, if you go into it, the very far west you'd have the door of night, and the east the gate of morning. But yeah, that's pretty much as far as you're going, and then you're into void territory if you're going beyond the outer sea and beyond the walls of night. How do you get the inspiration to make podcasts or videos? Well, as I'll say in a clip that's going to come up about why I'm so interested in Lord of the Rings, it's easy to be inspired if you're so interested in discussing something. I'll talk about Tolkien or Lord of the Rings with anyone really, and at length and depth. I could talk about it for ages. And for making videos or something like that, the whole idea was that originally I wanted to do something a bit different. Well, there's many channels that talk about Lord of the Rings and Tolkien, but most of them, I'll say, are what we call lore channels. So if you want to know the history of the Shire, for example, and you all know what the Shire is, you've read Fellowship of the Ring, there'll be videos that just tell you that, and that's it. If you want to know who Sauron is, there'll be videos that will explain his, or tell you his history and what kind of being he is, and that kind of factual information. So when I started, I thought, well, that's kind of getting done, and there's channels that are way, way, way bigger than mine that do that, and they're very successful. Everyone talks about that stuff, and anyone can go and find that information themselves. It's very easy. You can just go to a great wiki site for Tolkien called Tolkien Gateway. That's the best Tolkien wiki site, and there's some very, very knowledgeable people that run that and edit that daily and make sure that it's at a high standard. You can go and find that information. If you want the history of the Shire, there you go, it's all written down for you. But I just thought, well, I've read this stuff so often, so much, that there's things I want to discuss, like ideas I have about it, that maybe I could do it in video form and some people would be interested. And there's a few channels that do that. I'm not unique at all in doing that. There are other channels that like to do analysis and share their thoughts about the stuff as well, and I like that because it's more unique to the person. You can read certain texts and gather ideas about it and share them, and it is more an explanation. Some channels say they're explaining something, but they're just giving you the facts. With videos I want to make or try to make, I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to explain maybe a concept, or just something interesting beyond the facts, the things you can just find out yourself. So just an example, one thing I love talking about is Morgoth's ring. So most of you may not know who Morgoth is if you've just read Fellowship of the Ring. He was Sauron's former master, and he performed a similar kind of deal to the One Ring, but it was called Morgoth's Ring, where he put his power, and instead of it being into a gold ring, it was into the world itself, in order to gain a greater control of it. And it's a whole big interesting concept to me, and I love talking about that, and I have videos about it. But you're not going to get that from Lord of the Rings, just reading that. And this is stuff I like to talk about, like, yes, explaining it, but pointing out places where people can go and read about this, and maybe less developed concepts that people have forgotten about, or just I want to talk about interesting things that not everyone's talking about. And like, a very interesting one I thought was you're going to, if and when you move on to the Two Towers, you'll meet the men of Rohan, the Rohirrim, and I made a video about the legend behind how their kingdom was founded and who founded it, and it ends up being this almost like a political lie made by the men of Gondor, and there ends up being two versions of a kingdom's history. There's one that's pretty much the truth, and then there's the other one that's the fantastical myth surrounding it. But I think that's brilliant, and it's not me completely making this up. It's there in these texts. If you explore them, you can bring that together and make an interesting post or video or podcast, whatever, letting other people know about it. And it's not me doing that to then say, well, you don't need to know anything else about that, I've told you everything. I'm doing it so that people can then go and read that stuff themselves and develop their own ideas and everything. It's just, that's what's the inspiration behind it. Is if I had time, if I wasn't working full time elsewhere, I'd get a lot more content out there, which is a shame. But it's inspiring, hoping to make some content, if you call it that, that's mine. That's what I try to do. There's been plenty of videos and that I've abandoned or not gone ahead with because someone else has come out with it, and I'm like, well, I want to do something a bit different. And I think that's the inspiration to just keep talking about Tolkien, which I love doing, but something interesting about it that you're not just going to get if you go and Google it. That's my kind of goal. How tall are you? So I did say I would answer all the questions, and this is definitely one I never expected, but I'm 5'8", and instead of just ending there and saying 5'8", I went and did a little digging and can see that the UK male average is 5'9", so I've just missed out on that. And I was curious about people who are 5'8" for reference. So apparently Mark Ruffalo, Joaquin Phoenix, Robert Downey Jr., apparently they're all 5'8". At least I'm taller than Tom Cruise, who's about 3'6" or something. And to bring it back to Lord of the Rings, apparently Gandalf, when he's all hunched over, is about 5'6", so I'm taller than Gandalf. I'm probably about orc height, put it that way. How many languages do you speak? So, apologies if I've got the wrong end of the stick here, but I don't know if this is being asked because I've mentioned speaking other languages, or if it's because I'm from Scotland. I'll cover the second part first, just in case it is that, because some people do get confused about Scotland, and I have spoken to Americans in the past who thought we didn't speak English as a first language. Someone literally told me that my English was good. I thought, well, that's nice, it's my first language. But yeah, Scottish people, English is the first language. We all speak English. There are some people who speak Gaelic as a first language, Scots Gaelic, but you could probably live here your whole life and not meet any of them, depending where you are, really. If you look at a map of Scotland, you'll see labelled on the west, the northwest, the Hebrides, the Western Isles. People can speak Gaelic there as their first language, and a few other areas, but it's quite rare. The vastly populated areas in the central belt, like Glasgow, Edinburgh, where most people live down the central belt, it's English, it's the first language. But it's curious because people from outside of Scotland can struggle with the accent. This isn't really how I would speak day to day. It's a very it's like held back a little bit because of the audience. A lot of Scottish people mix in Scots words. That's just how we're brought up. So Scots was a language 1500 years ago, whatever, brought here, and it's like everyone else speaking the Germanic accent that was ancestral to Scots and other languages, and it took in Latin, Dutch, French, and Scandinavian languages as well, and it was spoken in quite large areas of Scotland, and Gaelic was spoken in others as well. But there's a weird thing that happens where these dialects kind of use it. So people from the northeast and Aberdeen and that would speak Doric, it's called. And then you can go up to Shetland, one of the islands at the far north, and there's words that those places will use that I wouldn't use, and I probably wouldn't know what we're talking about. But there's words that all of us pretty much use. So I know you're probably just asking because I've mentioned maybe somewhere in our video or whatever, but so sorry if this is just all completely uninteresting, but there's words that we would use all the time that are Scots words mixed in with English, and if you're not from here, you might not know what we're talking about. So we do say I a lot instead of yes, and na for no. Some other ones like a blether is to have a chat. Crabbit is like moody. Something like canny, which is just cannot. Greeting is like to cry. Hoachin, I use that a lot. But it's hoachin, I would say hoachin if the place was really busy, but some people use hoachin to mean like smelly or something like that. Scunnered is like annoyed or sometimes tired and that kind of thing. We would say guising instead of trick or treat that you would say. And my face on this camera looks peely-wally, which is like kind of off-colour, sickly pale. Wee is small, you would know that one. If you're familiar with something like Outlander, which is really not representative of Scotland, by the way, but they probably use words like Sassenach or something like that, which is an old word we would say for someone who is English or like a foreigner. But we don't walk around saying that. It's not that's not what we do. And some people here would say words like ken, which means no, like as in I know or I don't know. So I dinna ken. Some people would say I don't know. I wouldn't say that. But yeah, and one I like would be like glaikit. That's quite a cool word, like foolish or something, or a mink. Like I don't want to explain what kind of people you'd call glaikit, but people from Glasgow would say something like gallus, which is a bit kind of cheeky. I wouldn't say gallus. I'm not from there. But anyway, sorry for the big language lesson about Scotland, but that's something like we'd say. Glasgow is the city, but I would say Glasgow, and those kind of words just are honestly just so natural to us. And even though we speak English, people who also speak English who aren't from here won't know. No, if I say a shugle or a fankle or bahuki or something like that, you've no idea what I'm talking about, but people here would know. And for me personally, I also speak Swedish and Danish, but that's quite rare here. Not many people speak that at all. I think I've met about 2 people in the whole of Scotland that do. Just in my, I'm not saying there's 3 of us in the whole of Scotland. I'm just saying that's how rare. You're not really going to meet people that speak these languages. And one of them was actually from Sweden. So that was just because I do like languages, and I wanted to. First I wanted to learn one of those, and I went for Danish, which is insanely difficult, to be honest. I'm not so great at speaking it now. There was a time where I was pretty confident in it, but again, it's lack of practice. I used to have a group that I would speak with all the time, and I'm better at writing it than that now, but I think I could still survive for a while in Denmark. But like most languages you're learning, if you're around native speakers, they're really fast and they're speaking dialects and slang, and you don't really learn that. I speak very formal Danish. It sounds like I am a foreigner who has studied Danish. And Swedish was the other one I was going to do, and I did that later, and I actually really like Swedish. I like Danish too, but I think Swedish sounds really cool, and I'm not saying Danish is close to Swedish, it's not really. They sound quite different, but the process of learning Danish did make it easier for me to learn Swedish, except
a lot of the words that look similar and they're pronounced completely different. It's a different language, so there's like pitfalls there where you think I know how to say that, and it's a completely different rule. But yeah, I speak those, and I don't get much practice, but yeah, that's just me. I do like languages. I don't really get to use them very often at all, but it was very interesting to learn it and speak with people who do speak it, and I don't know, I always recommend and just learn another one if you can. The US is a bit like the UK in that regard. We kind of just speak English and just think that's good enough, but learning a language is just, I thought it was quite fun, quite interesting, and I would like to do another one in the future. Why are you so interested in Lord of the Rings? Well, certain people have an itch that likes to get scratched from certain books and authors, and I have quite a few, and Lord of the Rings seems to scratch all of them. I'm really, before I was interested in Lord of the Rings or Tolkien, I was really interested in mythology. I still really like reading about mythology and history as well. And then, through like video games and stuff, it was like fantasy as well. And I eventually kind of get into Lord of the Rings, and it's, how do I explain it? When it comes to languages, like I've just explained about being interested in languages, history and fantasy and mythology, it does everything so well to the point where I struggle to read other attempts at doing it. And this will kind of get tied in with what other books would I recommend. It's pretty hard because I give up on a lot of them because I started with what I think's the best. And if you really get into something like Lord of the Rings, it starts to feel like, I know it's called like the secondary world to Tolkien, kind of alternate history kind of thing, but you can really read it like that. And that's why I'm saying, if you are interested in the things that I am, like the languages, the history and the mythology, and mixing with fantasy and developing, all these things developing over decades of writing and being able to investigate those changes, and it's just, there's so much to enjoy about it. You can get invested in Lord of the Rings to any kind of depth you want. There are those that just pick it up and read it once a year or so, and they don't go any further than that, and that's great. But there are others like me who would read Lord of the Rings, right? They'd read the appendices, right? They would read Unfinished Tales and Silmarillion, and then the History of Middle-earth volumes, and then letters, and just start. Something will come up and you want to go and dig deeper into that. Well, a name of some place gets mentioned and you want to know everything about it. And then a line of kings gets mentioned and you can go and investigate it as if you're reading about a real line of kings. It's all there. There's so much information. And after reading it, I lost count at 50 times, whatever, it's still interesting, and there's still stuff to talk about and thoughts that I have that I want to discuss, and it never gets boring. I love the way it's written. I love the way it was created. I love the mysteries that still remain that will never be solved, but everyone likes talking about them. The languages, the poetry, what I call in some videos I've made, I say like legend within the legend. I just love that you can read Lord of the Rings and there's a mythology within it according to the characters themselves. There's a history to those characters in their own world. I just think that's so brilliant.
Especially since in The Lord of the Rings, you're essentially reading late Middle-earth, Third Age. So much has happened before, and a lot of them don't know anything about it, and it just starts to feel so real, and there's a great depth to it. It's something that I don't get from other like fantasy books, where I think they're trying to be like Tolkien, and it's just not the same. It's not as good. Like the names, like Tolkien's names all mean something. If I give you the name of any character, you can go and find out what that name means and what language that name is in, and it's real that way. The name of rivers or mountains, alternate names, why they were given those names in some cases, in many cases, some names relating to characteristics of figures, and it's like meticulous in its kind of design, and I just don't think there's anything else that compares to it, really. All of that just mixed together is why I'm so interested in it. And it's, you can, and some people do, just discuss Tolkien for decades, and it goes, no, you've said why I'm interested in Lord of the Rings, it does go beyond that. There are other books that just add to the depth of it. You can go and read parts of the Silmarillion that are mentioned in Lord of the Rings, and yeah, it's just, depending on what interests you, it's almost like a perfect book for you. Even people that aren't interested in all that stuff I said, they read it a different way. There's something about it that they'll like. It could just be the writing style, it could just be the plot itself. It's whatever you want. And with the amount of times I've read it and how often I discuss it and everything, I don't think I'll ever lose interest in Lord of the Rings. What other books would you recommend that are like The Fellowship of the Ring? So this was a bit of a tough one because, as I've said, I'm really picky with books that are meant to be like Tolkien's books, and I never really get into them. But I do have recommendations because I know that a lot of other people do get into them, and it'd be wrong for me to say you shouldn't check them out because you might end up liking them. But the first thing I'll say is Tolkien should be next. If you're reading The Fellowship of the Ring, you should read Two Towers and you should read Return of the King. Yeah, they can be sold in separate volumes and everything, but The Lord of the Rings is one story. It was meant to be one big book. But with paper rations, it was split into 3 volumes. And, you know, it's a book of books. There's 6, really. Each volume has 2 books. But you'd never say, like, oh, I recommend reading book 4. It's all part of the one big story. It's just split that way. Like 6 books in 3 volumes. But you can buy really nice 1 volume Lord of the Rings books, and you shouldn't stop at Fellowship of the Ring. Basically, you must go on to Two Towers and Return of the King before anything else. And from that, if you still enjoyed it, The Hobbit's the obvious recommendation. That's before The Lord of the Rings, and there's some things that tie them together, but that's the number 1 recommendation. And from that, you would go to the Silmarillion, which is quite a different book, as I've said, but it's more of the history and the mythology and the epic kind of events of the past, and really interesting book that's just so different from Lord of the Rings. But you would have to read that one and get a greater grasp on the Legendarium as a whole. And then from there you could go into like Unfinished Tales, which, as the name tells you, the stories aren't finished, but there's plenty to read there, and there's nice essays as well about certain things if you want to know more about the Palantiri, the Seeing Stones, or the Wizards, or Istari, things like that. There's like essays for it that are giving you a lot of information, and then there's great stories like the Mariner's Wife, and there's even some first stage stuff in there too. There's more about Galadriel and Celeborn. You know, it's a really good book. And from there you could go to like the Great Tales, Beren and Luthien, The Fall of Gondolin, The Children of Húrin, which I would recommend anyway if you're reading the Silmarillion. But if you move away from Tolkien, I'm basically saying read everything with Tolkien's name on it if you're interested, but I would recommend the kind of Earthsea books from Ursula Le Guin. Really, really great author, and I'm not saying read her Earthsea books because they are like Lord of the Rings. There are some similarities, but it's its own thing. Really great writing as well, a different kind of writer and world builder from Tolkien. She has her own qualities that in some ways are even more interesting than Tolkien, and Tolkien has his that are more interesting than hers. They're both kind of their own kind of unique writers, and they're well worth reading. Different kind of world building and a story, but that's the number one I'd recommend. It wasn't Tolkien, to be honest, and she was a really great writer, and there's loads of great stories there. But the ones that I've written some down that others always recommend, and I just didn't get into them, but many do, and I'll give them to you. The Wheel of Time's a big one. So there's I've not written here, but I'm sure there's like 14 or something like that, and I got through like 2.5, and I didn't like it. It's funny that you're mentioning books that are like Fellowship of the Ring, because the first one I read is basically plagiarism for Fellowship of the Ring, and I got through like 2.5 and I just wasn't feeling it. And I remember someone specifically telling me that I had to read about 6 before it got really good. So, oh no, you're at those ones, it gets good around book 6. I'm not reading 6 books to get into something, that's ridiculous. But you might like Wheel of Time, loads of people like it, and if you do get into it, there's loads of books. You'd have some sort of quest going through all of them. But no, that's the same kind of deal with, I don't like it as much as I keep saying, but it's got the big quest and multitude of characters in a fantasy world and everything. It's plenty to sink your teeth into there. And I've put down Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. Again, I read like 3 of these, I think, quite a while back, and I don't like the world building. I don't like how it seemed kind of haphazard to me with the creatures and the races and everything. It's just not like Tolkien, which despite being a fantasy story, for saying that, it seems more logical to me. And that might sound so strange if we're talking about Balrogs and wizards and stuff, but that's just how well written it is. But with Narnia, it's like, Santa Claus is there with a lion who's Jesus. It just wasn't my thing. But it has a good and evil story and magical creatures, and there's loads of books as well, and you might enjoy the world building and the stories themselves. So I've put that down. There's the Stormlight Archive series by Brandon Sanderson. It's a very popular writer. I didn't really get into this either, but that had loads of characters as well, and huge world, heroes and darkness and everything. It's like, it is just one of these that if you do read it and you get into it, you would really enjoy it. But I just didn't, unfortunately. And Brandon Sanderson as well, the Mistborn series, I like that a bit more. Similarities, the Dark Lord, and more world building, and has some very interesting characters, and that's what, I'd probably recommend Mistborn. And what else do I have? I've put down Christopher Paolini's inheritance cycle. That's where Eragon and things like that. I read that years and years and years ago, just once. I liked dragons and all that stuff, and I'll forget the terrible movie and that. I thought the books were okay. I've not read them since, but I'd probably recommend that as well. And one that I did put in here that's more kind of pulp kind of writing, but I really enjoy it. This is one I do like, but I'm just recommending it because it's kind of fantasy. But the Elric saga by Michael Moorcock. He's like an albino last emperor from a fallen empire, and it's clearly influenced. Even if he says it didn't, I don't know if he says it didn't, but he never talks about it. But I don't think you'd have Targaryens from George R. R. Martin's story without Elric of Melniboné. But I really like them. It's not as complex in the writing and all that as Tolkien, and Michael Moorcock had problems with Tolkien's writing, big problems, but I really like them. I like the character, I like the stories, the world building, and a protagonist that's not entirely good. I think he's really interesting, and there's loads of stuff about fate and destiny and all this, and I find that really interesting. And I like the older kind of stories as well. I like Elric stories. I like Conan and these kind of things more modern fantasy writing. But I think that's plenty. You'll have enough to read for the next 15 years with all those recommendations. But start with Tolkien. Can you read the entire Lord of the Rings in an audiobook? So I didn't know how to take this question if you're asking if it's possible to have Lord of the Rings in an audiobook, or if you were asking if I could record an audiobook. I didn't really know which way this was. So I'll take the latter first. I think if you did mean that, it would be an enormous undertaking, and people far, far better than me have already done it. I think it would only get listened to by a few people because it's copyrighted, it's a big deal. Unofficial ones do exist, which I'll talk about in a second. Yeah, I don't think enough people would want me to do that. I always think my voice is really boring when I'm reading, but I'd prefer to maybe do something like a chapter analysis, which would involve reading and then discussing. I think that'd be more interesting. I do, at this stage, after reading Lord of the Rings so many times, if I'm not reading it at night or something, like when I'm about to go to sleep, I'll read it aloud. I think that's a really good way to read it. And, you'll maybe change a character's voice or something like that, just wandering around reading Lord of the Rings out loud. But I recommend that. I recommend reading it aloud. It's written so well that it really works when you do that. But yeah, I don't think there's enough people that are interested in me recording the whole thing. But if you're asking, can you get an audiobook for Lord of the Rings? Yeah, there's pretty much 3 that people discuss. There's Rob Inglis, there's Andy Serkis, and there's Phil Dragash. Now, the first one, Rob Inglis, he did it first. That's the kind of classic one. I feel that the Rob Inglis one, it's almost like as if someone like Tolkien was sitting there reading it to you. I think that's the feeling you get from that one. It's like an intimate reading, not overblown with the production or anything. he does the songs very well, and reads at a good pace, and it's an enjoyable experience. The Andy Serkis one, I've only went through half of Fellowship, I think, and I didn't enjoy that one as much. This might be rich coming from me, because I think that when I'm recording stuff or speaking on camera, I'm quite slow at reading. I'm not slow at reading in real life, but I'm just saying when I'm recording that, I speak at a slower pace. But Andy Serkis drags it out, and he's kind of doing some voices from the Peter Jackson movies and that, because he's got a atrocious Scottish accent for Pippin, and it's I just don't think it's as enjoyable as English in that regard, because, as I'm about to go on to, if you want that kind of more movie production of an audiobook, with the voices, and it's not just sitting reading the book, Phil Dragash has got the best one, but it's an unofficial one, which you had to take down, but you can find it if you Google it. And he created like what you call like a soundscape kind of project, and I backed him. I remember this was like 2013 or something like that, maybe earlier, but it was something like that. And he had like a donation kind of page, and I was like very interested because he was still recording at that time, and I thought it was an amazing project. He does use the movie stuff, but I think it worked quite well. He uses some of the amazing music from Howard Shore. He does the voices. He's got a wide range of voices, and it's like an epic kind of experience. It's really, really fun to listen to, and I'd recommend it for people who... There are a lot of people out there who just will never read Lord of the Rings, but they want to, but they're just not going to sit and read it. But if you could even go to this audiobook, it's worth it. And that's why I think out of those three, Andy Serkis loses out in both, really, because he's not got that kind of intimate Tolkien reading it to you that Rob Inglis has, but he's not got the movie quality production of the Phil Dragash one, which I would hope would at some point get remixed and reworked in a couple of places, but probably not, because it's so unofficial, and he had no right to record it legally. But yeah, they're out there if you want them, and if you were meaning me doing it, a lot of people would have to ask me to do that. I don't think it would be very enjoyable for people. Do you have a favourite Tolkien book? If so, what would it be? Now, this is a tough one, because it makes it seem like I'm putting down others by saying that I prefer one, because there's one in particular that offers something that the other one doesn't really, but I still can't put it at number one, so I'd have to still say it's The Lord of the Rings. I think The Lord of the Rings does everything. It has the scale, the scope, that epicness, the mythology, the history, all the poetry, the languages. It's got a great story, great characters. I like the pace of it, I like the structure of it. It's just an enjoyable experience all the time, and it's got the complete narrative and a great appendices section at the back. It's just the complete package, really. Tolkien finished it, and it's the full experience. It's just, I always have to put that at number one. It's what I recommend anyone who's going to read Tolkien should read. And I know you guys have only read Fellowship, but I really hope you go on to Two Towers and Return of the King. Finish it all off. And for those who really enjoy that and want to go on, there's other books as well. But Lord of the Rings is the one that I think everyone should just read. But the one that I was kind of close with was the Silmarillion, and I can't discuss everything here about why it would not be number one, but Tolkien didn't finish it. It was edited, even though it's an amazing achievement editing it and getting it out. there are stories and parts that aren't included for editorial reasons that I would really have liked to have been included. That's like the real kind of mythology book. It's maybe less about the narrative, it's the world building, the sheer number of characters, the seeing Middle Earth in the First Age, but just how different it is from the Third Age. And I love the whole tale of the Silmarils and the Oath of Fëanor and Morgoth's downfall, and then you even get the sections at the end where it's one of my favourite stories, which is the downfall of Numenor. That's all there, and it's amazing. I'm so glad Christopher Tolkien edited that with Guy Gabriel Kay, another author, to get it out, because I can't imagine, well, obviously I can't imagine, but no Silmarillion, it's the amount of stuff we just couldn't talk about if that wasn't there. And I love it. A lot of people find it difficult to read. I've never really understood that. I think there's a lot of characters with the same first letter in their name, but there's no real excuse to be confused now with it, because you can easily have, if you're getting confused with all these names, there's so many resources to, if you wanted to keep track of that stuff, if you can't just by reading it. I know you don't want some workbook out if you're just reading a book, but if you were struggling with things like that, it can be eased with family trees, the genealogies that are all written out for you. And that's very biblical in style and scale. People say it's a bit drier, less of the dialogue and more just like descriptions and explanations of things, but I really like it. And I do like that the Silmarillion is so different from Lord of the Rings. It reads nothing like it, but you can tell it's still the same world, the same author, but just the style of it's different. It's not written as that narrative like Lord of the Rings. So I can understand why people would have Silmarillion as number one, but for me it's behind the Lord of the Rings. But I still love it. I've read that a lot of times as well, and especially when I talked about certain things that drew me to Lord of the Rings, the Silmarillion does certain things better in that regard. If you're talking about this idea of mythology and the storytelling, it's definitely there. A lot of what happens in the Silmarillion is the mythology for future ages of Middle Earth, and the world's drawing away from tales of gods and all of that. You're getting that in the Silmarillion though. There's one other book I want to just mention as some sort of study reference thing instead of like a great story to read. A vital book for me is The History of Middle Earth, Volume 10, Morgoth's Ring. I think for anyone who's read the main stories and everything, and they're wanting to really get into Tolkien more, they're definitely dry, because they're not written as stories, but Morgoth's Ring's essential for understanding other concepts and the world building and the stories themselves. And that's out of those 12 History of Middle Earth volumes. If you were kind of taking some away and saying what ones are essential, I'd always put that at number one. But I'm definitely not saying it's my favourite Tolkien book, but out of the kind of study ones, the History of Middle Earth, the History of the Hobbit, the Nature of Middle Earth, all these kind of ones, Volume 10 of History of Middle Earth is top of the pile for me.